Hello there, Sir from 17 once again. This is a Prince of Persia walkthrough for the 2008 reimagining of the Pop series. It has been played on the PC, and I'm going to be trimming out all non-essential moments. I'm also going to try and do it no damage, just to make the fighting a little bit more interesting. However, ladies and gentlemen, that does not mean that I will not be getting hit. That does not mean that I will not be making mistakes, that I played perfectly the entire time on my first attempt in one single segmented, insane show of skill, motor function, and just complete mastery. What it does mean, guys, is that there is a lot of editing in this, and it's never been my intention to hide edits from you. I'm not somebody who does something known as splicing, not willfully anyhow, to try and be malicious. I just trim the videos in such a way to hopefully make them a bit more enjoyable to watch, and to make the project a bit more enjoyable to play and a bit more structured for me to do. And what that details in here as we run forward as the Prince following Elika and getting introduced to the platforming of this game is you can save anywhere in this Prince of Persia, which for a 2008 game on console, that's kind of insane. It gives you a huge level of flexibility. And of course there are limitations to it. There are certain moments where you can't save, and certain moments where it just doesn't let you, but fundamentally you can make your own checkpoints in this game. And the reason that they've done that is because it's quite an open world based game in the grand scheme of the linear adventure, and the world does open up and there's a lot of backtracking opportunities because you can go back through the areas that you've cleansed, you can pick up the collectibles, you can do a lot of things like that, and the world is really well put together. There's a lot of thought that's gone into the way it weaves and winds around its canyons and valleys and mountains and peaks and everything. And I think it's a really, really cool thing. However, one of the areas where it does suffer is the autosave only really procs every so often. So what will happen, guys, is because this game has a glaring flaw, which if you're familiar with this Prince of Persia, you'll know what that is. You don't usually need to reload a checkpoint because you don't die in this game. This game has a huge issue with death and killing the player, and it's something that I'm going to be talking at length in this walkthrough because it's such a fascinating failure of game design, and I think it's one of the reasons why this game didn't get the best reception when it came out, in spite of the fact that I do think that there's a lot of greatness here, and it runs beautifully on PC all considered and looks so good. The fact that this is cel-shaded and the fact it has such a stylistic visual style means that this game is going to age far better than the original Prince of Persia trilogy did on the PlayStation. And I love those games, but they've not aged as well visually as your memory would serve. However, this game looks phenomenal. But you don't have to reload in this game too much because of the way it's been designed. So it's one of those areas of game design where most players will never have a problem with the checkpoint system or the saving system because there's no reason to, because the game is so forgiving and structured in such a way to make it incredibly accessible. But if you're doing no damage, like I'm trying to do, I have to back out of the game because the game does not kill you. So you can stand and let an enemy kill you and wail on you and execute you, and the game will resuscitate you in the same fight with all your health back, with the enemy at the same HP. And there's no way for it to say you've fucked up, you've done wrong, now go back. Just doesn't happen, doesn't work that way. It's very interesting and unique. So the only way to go back on progress to re-record is to close the application. And because the PC port to this game is pretty squirrely, is the best way of putting it, is it leads to a problem that I didn't know the game had when I started this project, and a problem that ended up being an absolute nightmare until I got used to the combat and got used to the gameplay, and then I didn't have to reset so much. So get this, ladies and gentlemen. So when you close this game and you reopen it, the very first load of the game will not load. It is a rotating cog symbol, and it has to rotate a certain amount in order for the next part of the game to be booted and to be processed into the pipeline. If it doesn't rotate, it doesn't load. This game has a known problem on GOG where the game doesn't load unless you do 9 million different fixes. And I tried all of the fixes that were recommended, turning on VSync, messing around with certain windowed properties, things of that nature, running it in compatibility mode. None of them worked. However, what I noticed when I was recording on my second monitor is that when I alt-tabbed out of the game, in those fleeting transitional moments between alt-tabbing from full screen to my desktop, the game would load incrementally a little bit. So that led me to spamming alt-tab repeatedly for like 20 seconds to get the game to load and put me in the game. So every single time I made a mistake on this project, I had to Alt F4 to close the game, relaunch the game, and then spam Alt and Tab to make the game load. And I think that that is completely unacceptable. Obviously, this game is designed in such a way that if you play it casually, you'll never run into this problem outside of that initial load because it happens regardless. So they've essentially sold a broken game, a broken port, and I think that that's disgusting and disgraceful. And as much as I love this game, and I do not recommend you pick this up on PC unless you're one of the people that doesn't have that problem. If you have that problem, it's super frustrating unless you do it in single segments. And I did look for some fixes, but I couldn't find any. There might be one out there on a YouTube video, maybe the speedrunners that play this game have figured out a way around it, but fundamentally, the game is not what it should be considering that you pay money to get it. And I wanted to get that out of the way really soon, guys, because I think this game is amazing. I think this game is a triumph in so many ways, and I think it was about 10 years ahead of its time. And it's interesting to come back and play it because this was just before my YouTube started. A couple of years before I started YouTube, when I was super passionate about video games, playing everything that I could, really into achievements. That right there is important too. Did you see what I did then when I climbed up? The game's platforming is phenomenal, all considered. It is the culmination of everything the original Prince of Persia trilogy on the PlayStation brought to the table, and then what Assassin's Creed did with its simplification and accessibility. This game meets in the middle of a fusion of the two systems, and some of it works and some of it doesn't. But the one area of the platforming that does show some age and does have those moments of quandaries happening in the gameplay is when you mantle things. In this game, if you mash the jump button as you're climbing up a wall, it will not force you into a mantle state like it does in a lot of modern games. It will instead make the prince kick off the wall and jump towards the other direction. And this is one of those universal rules that used to be how things were until platforming changed it. And every other platforming game kind of took on this fundamental. So in this game, if you get too happy mashing the button to climb like you would in something like an Assassin's Creed, you're going to jump off into the void. And it happens to me a whole bunch of times, and it takes a while to get adjusted to. And I think there's only that, and the sliding. The sliding down things is kind of awkward and not the most fun. That's another area of the platforming that's showing its age. But I would say the jumping back off the wall, the sliding, and turning around pillars, that might be the only parts of the platforming here where you can consciously go, hang on a second, this feels a little bit different to what I'm used to. However, everything else, except for perhaps its sense of speed, which is another thing I'm going to talk about later on, I feel like the game it's really timeless in what it was doing. And there's things that this game does that modern games aren't doing very well. And I just think that it's so unique and so interesting that a game that could be one of the more misaligned entries in the Prince of Persia series can still show such a sublime level of pedigree, and most importantly, a lot of fun too. Like, when I was looking for projects to make something for the first project of the year, I went through a ton of different games for different reasons. And then when I decided to try this, I didn't have any high hopes because it had been such a long time since I played it, and I knew from my experience of playing it that it was one of those games that you either love or you hate. It's a very interesting in how it was received, this game. But when I started playing, I did this start sequence, I did the introduction that you just witnessed, and then I did this level, I did the platforming, and I got all the way up to the first fight with the hunter, and I fought the hunter. And then when I cleansed the zone, and it changed the colour palette, and it became beautiful, and all the light seeds popped up, it hit this huge sting of, gosh, this game is fun. It's simple, it's relaxing, it's fun, it's kind of everything it was wanting to be at a time where linear games were becoming lesser the priority in the main AAA direction. We were getting a lot more open worlds, a lot more jack of all trades rather than masters of very few things, less focused games leading to more homogenized games, and this game is definitely one of the children of that transition, but it's also moving towards keeping some of those old school fundamentals and moving towards a more accessible, more varied approach. And it's this middle tier zone of a really good balance, I think. But this is our first encounter with one of the corrupted. In this Prince of Persia, you don't do too much fighting, so when you do, it's this kind of super cinematic, almost scripted fencing fights that you see right now. And they look quite spectacular and interesting, and there's a decent amount of meat to them, but the combat was one of the areas that people really didn't like. And we're definitely going to talk about that, but we've just taken out the hunter, he's going to run away, and it's going to introduce you to what you do in this game, which is cleansing these corrupted zones in these sanctuaries, on the fertile grounds as it's called. So to give you a little synopsis for the plot that I'm removing, which if you want to see the plot of this game and you want to play it, guys, I absolutely recommend it. The charisma between the characters, the writing, the development, it's all very good. Prince of Persia was Ubisoft storytelling at its finest, in my opinion. Like, there was no pointless fucking dalliances into nonsense, there was no Desmond walking around and being told to go to bed. It was just a lot better. But as you saw at the beginning, Elika is running away from some guards. She stumbles into the prince who's looking for his donkey. And they end up getting stuck in a cursed version of their world, of their realm, because something's happened and this greater demon Ahriman is being released and his corruption is following with him. And the only way to set the world right is to go to all these fertile grounds and cleanse them with this magic that this princess has who's with you. And that forms the backbone of what you're going to be doing. And the way that this game is structured is kind of interesting, because you can choose pretty much any of the locations you want to go to first. You can handle it in a non-linear fashion, and I'm just going to be randomly going through it. Here is the map. So do you see those glowing blue circles on these 4 branches leading off of this tree of levels? So if you pick one of those, then you can press the magic button and it will show you this waypoint that will point you towards your direction to where you're going. And you want to go to these new areas, you want to overcome their puzzles and their platforming challenges, and then you want to take out their corrupted figurehead. And there are 4 of them. There are 4 presets. There's the Concubine, there is the Hunter, who we've just taken on, who you just saw, there's the Alchemist, and then there is the Warrior. And each of these bosses is a returning character, and as you go through the zones, cleansing their particular areas of the world of the corruption, you're going to learn a little bit more about the boss, about the story, about your characters, about yourself, and it's going to all move towards getting to the final encounter against the great darkness itself, the dark god who is causing all this chaos. And how it works in structure is you go to a new area, you do the things I just mentioned, you kill the boss, you cleanse the area, and then you go further into that area. There'll be another 4 areas to cleanse with another 4 encounters with the boss. They all vary slightly with some kind of new nuance or new gameplay perspective. And then after that you open a final gate which opens into the final encounter with the boss where you get to kill them for good. And it culminates in, I think you fight each of the boss archetypes about 5 times, or maybe 6 times. The introductory fight, the 4 zones, and then the final cleansing. And you do that for 4 different enemies and 4 different fights that share a common design element. And this was one of the points of contention, I think, when the game came out. Because for some reason, and I don't really get this because I come from Devil May Cry, and Devil May Cry is a game that's reused its bosses. If you think of Capcom's Pantheon, a lot of the times they reuse the bosses and change certain things to enable them to do a lot more game design on smaller budgets and less production time, and it went a long way. It went away towards, you know, creating things like the boss rush and the palette swaps and things of that nature that we saw in more limited times of video games. So people for some reason have this sour taste when it comes to killing the same boss again, especially if they have any kind of commonality, which I just don't really understand personally. And for whatever reason, this game got some backlash with the idea that you just fight the same enemies repeatedly, and the fights themselves are identical, and there's no real deviation to it. And I can see those criticisms, and I can understand why you would think that, because you can absolutely say that. You don't have to push the game to any kind of real depth. When you see me fighting in this game, guys, which when we do more fighting I will be talking more about it, I am going to try and do all the different combos if I can. I'm going to try and do the different juggles, do the fancy moves, the fancy finishes and things like that. But a lot of the times it can be quite difficult to do them because you'll start a combo and you'll do an opener and it'll go into an animation, and the game has got pretty good visual language, but every so often you'll try and press an ender or press a linking button and nothing happens. So you'll see your characters freeze waiting for you to do the next button in the combo, and you might not press the correct button because you might press B, you might press Y, you might press A, but it wanted you to press X. And it only gives you a decent pocket of time to do it, so it's not too loose on the timing, but there's still enough finesse there for you to have agency and to do cool things. And by the end of the game, I was remembering some of the longer combos, but one of the things that makes you difficult to get into the combos is the way that the enemies deny you your hits. So you'd think, wouldn't you, that the game would be quite defensive and offensive until you land a hit or do a parry, and then you get a reward by being able to attack them. But one of the cool things that this game does is that the enemies have the ability to parry you and to interrupt your attack strings. And they can do this at any moment. So there's times when the enemy will let you hit them with 3 X's or 4 X's and then go into the A to do that big long extended combo for really good damage. But then sometimes you'll do 1 attack and they'll parry it, or 2 attacks and then they'll interrupt you, like a combo breaker in something like Killer Instinct. And it reminds me of Sekiro. It really does. The combat in this game is kind of the blueprint for Sekiro, and then Sekiro went its own way with it. And it's quite ironic that I say that, because I didn't like the blueprint that Sekiro used. Because to me, when you come from the Soul direction, there's so much creativity in those games, and I found it incredibly limiting. Whereas the combat in this game, it's that Sekiro angle of that defensive nature of parrying and waiting for them to interrupt and then parrying again. Only in this game it feels pretty satisfying. So you could say that this was Sekiro before Sekiro existed, and I've just pissed off every Sekiro fan on the planet and they're now writing an angry comment. But as we push forward here, we have the Alchemist's Introduction, and I'm going to introduce you to one of the biggest and most powerful mechanics in this game. So right now the Alchemist runs away from me up to this edge, and if I attack him into the edge, it's going to trigger a cinematic. If I win this cinematic, I will ring him out and instantly kill him, and it's not difficult to do, and that's the end of the fight. And you can do that on any fight that lets you ring them out, and I think that that's an amazing idea, because not only does it allow you to circumvent fighting these bosses that you fight a few times and people might think that's repetitive and not want to do it, but it also rewards knowledge, positioning, and understanding, and it's incredibly powerful. But what will happen in this game as we progress is you'll get into situations where either you cannot ring the enemy out, the environment won't allow you to ring the enemy out, or when you do ring them out, they teleport back into the ring, because the developers didn't want you to be able to just simply knock everybody out of the ring. And that's okay. That adds the complexity, that adds the differences, the nuance. It makes the game interesting. But it also opens up another one of those big holes in how the game is designed and what leads to some of the more frustrating factors of the game's combat, which we'll talk about when it happens. I'll keep an eye out for it, guys, and I'll go back into that tangent. But right now, because we've cleansed the fertile lands, it's going to rejuvenate and reinvigorate the surrounding territory, and you're going to see it turn from that corrupted darkness into this just wonderfully beautiful, verdant looking valley with these cliff sides and these precarious platforms that are all made of wood, but the player character just trusts them like they've been there for an eternity and they'll be there for an eternity more. But you'll notice it says 34 of those light items out of 60, and this is introducing you to a secondary activity in the game, and that is collecting light seeds. The first time you play this game, you're probably going to want to collect them all, and I know I did on the Xbox 360 when it came out. It was really fun to do, it was really therapeutic. In the game, there are certain parts where, in order to unlock more abilities, you have to tick off arbitrary light seed numbers. So this is actually mandatory picking them up. And what I would recommend, if you're playing along with this walkthrough, or if you're just playing it for the first time, is whenever you get the opportunity to make a little bit of a detour to grab a few of them, make sure you do it. Because if you completely ignore them, you're going to have to go back and do a huge grind or farm to get them anyway. So you always want to be making sure that you're picking them up as naturally and just as fluidly as you can by moving through the game and getting better at the game and exploring the world. And if you can work it into your normal traversal, it will reward you in the end, because you won't have to have your progress completely stilted and stunted by just the arbitrary tick box of collect several things. But this is the example of the turning on the items that I mentioned. So, did you notice how I was rotating around that like some idiot that didn't know where he was going or what he was doing? And admittedly, I can be an idiot that doesn't know those things. But that was not one of those moments. The visual language of the platforming then was very clear. The game was very well designed. However, turning on those pillars, it's got a level of delay to it, and a level 2 input buffering on it, where you can turn more times than you want to, and sometimes you'll press turn left and he'll turn right. So there's this weird kind of, depending on perspective, depending on camera, depends on where he goes sometimes, and that might just be complete player error. I'm not used to how it feels, and once you play for, a handful of hours, you get used to the pillars. But when you first get on the game, guys, after playing a lot more modern games than this, you're going to notice that these rotation moments can be a bit of a pain in the dick. But the game is really well designed for the most, so for a segment like this, when you jump towards these aerial ones, the prince will automatically scoot around, so you don't have to turn at all. So he does that automatically just then. That's all him, that's nothing to do with me. And it's a really cool attention to detail, because it stops you from messing with one of the weakest aspects of the game's movement. However, we've fallen into the Concubines Trap, and it's time to do the next of the corrupted scripted fights. So the Concubine's really interesting. She reminds me a little bit of Mewtwo, because she's got that tail thing going on. She reminds me of a few things. She's got the strange legs as well. But what you're going to have to do here is she's going to hide around the environment. So you traverse towards her and then attack her, and then eventually she's going to fight you on the platform, and she mocks you the whole time. And one of my criticisms of this game coming back is a lot of the cutscenes are in engine, which is really, really cool for preservation, because it means that you're going to be able to up-res them and use hardware to make them look really, really nice. But the problem there is you can't skip them on repeated plays. And I don't know if there's some kind of thing you can do with a config, or some kind of hot mod, or something that you can grab that might make it able to do that. But when I was playing, I had to watch through a lot of the stuff again, and admittedly, I think the writing is great. I think the voice acting is great. I think Nolan North absolutely kills it. Oh, and just there, ladies and gentlemen, if you heard that bell, if you have some headphones on, that signifies a manual save. And whenever you get the opportunity to stand on any kind of flat ground, if you save in some sequences, you will generally respawn from that very area. I can confirm, though, you do not respawn in this fight during this fight. The checkpoint here is at the very beginning of the sequence, and I don't think that that's a problem. I think that that's okay. But some fights are a little weird like that, other fights not so much. Anyhow, this is the Concubine, so immediately there's an edge. I'm going to rotate around her. She counters my first hit, I parry her, she parries me, I parry her, and then I get 2 hits before she parries, and then we go back into the hit string, and I'm going to be able to just then launch her up, and then when I finish this, I should put her out of the ring. But you'll notice the Concubine is unique. So she has a built-in hard counter to being one hit killed by the edge, which leads us to do some different combos on her. The weird thing with the combos is the damage that you do is all over the place. And it's one of the things I never really understood when I was playing. Like, there's times when you can do 75% of their HP with a combo, and then you do it again, or you do it in a different fight, and it does like 20%. So I don't really understand the threshold here or what's going on. But this is a good example of why the ring out system can sometimes be a little sucky, and I wish it was developed in different ways. Because, for instance, we can't kill her by ringing her out, but I can get into that ring out situation several times, and all it does is make me eat a canned animation that gets really frustrating. And it's one of those areas where it would be really cool if when you got them towards the edge like that, it turned the fight into a different dynamic, and your moveset changed to a more powerful moveset because you had the advantage and they had to be more defensive and you could be more offensive. But it's just the same game. The only difference is they go into this canned moment of guarding each other, and then they push each other back, and then they get to be completely behind you, and then you have your back to the edge. And I don't really know how to feel about it. It feels like a really cheap way of getting out of the corner. Like, if this was a fighting game, you'd be pissed off if somebody did that. Because it's not fair, is it? You take positioning and take advantage, and you take on these boss characters and put them into bad situations, and then they get out of jail for free. So it's one of those kind of oddities that's trying to even the fight, but it just seems to cuckold your ability to apply pressure. And that's not mentioning that it's not that difficult to put them against the wall, and it's not that difficult to corner carry to a wall like that and get into one of those animations. And I wish those animations had some kind of maybe rock, paper, scissors system to it, or some kind of counter and weakness system where you could do a certain attack during it, and if you saw that they were doing, you know, a light move or a light evade, you could do a heavy attack and crush it and get some serious damage on them, or maybe even get a stun or something. But it wasn't what they were going for, guys. You might notice from how I'm playing here and what we're doing, they really streamlined a lot of the game. They stripped it down, they brought it back to its fundamentals, to what it did well. They made the platforming very visual, very reactive. You have complete agency over it. None of this is automatic except for the wall running and the like ceiling scampering. Like, they brought it back to what Prince of Persia was all about. You press a button, you do a jump, you feel like you're connecting to the game. And bearing in mind that this is 2008, 2009, I think, so this is after Assassin's Creed had already turned up. Assassin's Creed turns up, completely changed the platforming game with its auto parkour, so this game comes back out and has another attempt, and brings back that player agency. And that could be another one of those factors in what hurt its reception. Just then, me tapping A, thinking I'm going to grab that, that's not how the game works, guys, you know? This game works a little differently. So this is giving player agency in the face of games that are starting to take it away and make things more autonomous. And it's a really interesting design and divide. And it's quite funny as well, because I never stopped loving Prince of Persia, and then Assassin's Creed kind of overtook it and kind of stole its thunder and became the go-to project that Ubisoft wanted to put out there. I got sick of Assassin's Creed very quickly, because it removed the things that I appreciated that these games were doing. And I really appreciated when they had another go at it, even though this one wasn't that much of a success for them. And then the one after this, I don't know how people received that one, but I did not like that one at all. It was meant to be some kind of prequel set in between Sands of Time and Warrior Within, and it was, I don't know, guys. I rented it at the time. I really disliked it because it just didn't do what I wanted it to do. And to me, you can't get better than that trilogy. Prince of Persia, Sands of Time, Warrior Within, and The Two Thrones. Those games, I've not played them in a very long time, and I really wish that they'd get readdressed and re-released in a really, really nice format with good performance on PC. And they do say that they're bringing out the Prince of Persia Sands of Time remake, aren't they? The remaster, or whatever they're calling it. And I'm excited to see what they do, even though it does look kind of rough, because that game right there it's such a classic. And it's definitely going to be on the channel, ladies and gentlemen. But this is the Warrior. So the Warrior is kind of unique, because he's the one guy where they absolutely want you to use the ring out system. So the other Corrupted, you can fight them, 1v1 them, you can just mash attack if you want to, and keep parrying them and just kill them with your sword. And that will be absolutely fine. Whereas this guy, you have to put him off the edge, it seems. The game really wants you to use your parrying and use your positioning and push him off. And later on, it's going to come down to an interesting sequence where you have to stay alive while he gradually decays. And it's one of the trickiest sequences in the game, because there's nothing quite like it. But now that we've done that, guys, we've got our 60 light seeds, we can come back to the tree temple in the desert, and it's going to introduce us to what I call the Sonic Adventure part of Prince of Persia, which is another one of these swings into new territory that ends up missing for me personally. So I go for the green ability. I think the green ability is the best. This is a plate that when you press Y on it, you then auto-scroll and run all the way up the wall, and I didn't press Y just then, that's why it didn't work. So in this moment, your character will just run by himself, and all you have to do is make micro adjustments left and right. And it enables the developers to sling together and chain together these really interesting looking wall running moments that you just probably couldn't do with the conventional systems at the time. And it's kind of cool, but the one problem with this is A, it's too basic, and B, it's too slow. And I don't know if that's because the limitations of the hardware at the time. I don't know if that's because they're going completely towards accessibility and trying to make this so that anybody can play it at any level. I don't know what that is, but that is definitely the most fun ability, I think, because it's the one that you do the most in. The rest of those abilities And the reason I call them the Sonic Adventure things is, can you remember when Sonic Adventure came out and you watched footage of it and it looked amazing because Sonic was going absolutely everywhere and it just looked so fast and so insane? And then you played it and you realised, a lot like classic Sonic, all you're doing in those moments is holding forward, and the game is literally sucking your dick, which is figurative use of the term literally, but, you know, they're putting it in the dictionary because so many people are doing it and I can't help it sometimes. Like, you're holding forward and Sonic is bouncing off 7 things, doing 9 different camera angles, doing a loop-the-loop, flying under a whale, flying over a whale, being inside a whale, and all you've done is hold the analog forward. And this is not me to belittle Sonic. I think Sonic is amazing, and if you like Sonic Adventure, it's a great game, you know, it was ahead of its time in many ways. But I don't think you can argue there are a lot of moments in Sonic where Sonic does what he wants and you watch. And that's one of the things that lets that game be so crazy and so fast and yet so accessible. And that's what those plates feel like in this game. They feel like you press a button on them and the game does something way cooler than you can do in the game. And I don't know about you guys, but it's the reason I think that QuickTime events got so misaligned so quickly. People went from loving QuickTime events to hating QuickTime events because they became ubiquitous. And what are QuickTime events? QuickTime events are really cool things that you press one button, the guy does something amazing, and you can't do anything even close to that amazingness in the actual game. And that's the big problem, isn't it? You don't want to be a badass in a cutscene, and then worthless when you get to play. You want the guy in the cutscene to be just as capable in the game as he was in that amazing QTE. And that's one of the reasons I think why God of War did so well, because you could pretty much QTE everything in that bloody game. Even the bosses, you know, and it made it so satisfying. But the plate system is leaked out to you incrementally by gating it with the light seeds. So every so often you kill some bosses, you use a few plates, you get a few of those seeds, you go back, you get an ability. And each time you get an ability, the next ability costs slightly more seeds. And then by the end, I think you need something like 540 seeds. So when I tell you guys to keep an eye out and pick up the seeds if you can to make your life a bit easier later on, I really mean it, because you're going to need a lot of them. But here is more of the green plate in action. The one thing to watch out on some of these sequences is that sometimes you can hit invisible edges on collision boxes that you can't quite see. And it can be one of those moments where you clear it, you're nowhere near it, and you still hit something. Fundamentally though, the game is designed really well, and there aren't too many moments like that because they've obviously gone back in there and smoothened them out. But it definitely tripped me up a few times on some of the different platforming moments, and it wouldn't surprise me if it did the same in those segments. But right here is a lever puzzle. This game does have a handful of puzzles, guys, and they're not the simplest when it comes to, you know, what you have to do. I mean, conceptually, all you need to do here is rotate these so that that long, big beam there is over on the other side, getting you to the fertile grounds. But it involves turning these platforms in several different ways and formations. And this is one of the areas of the walkthrough that's not going to be that great, guys. If you come to this walkthrough for the puzzles, you're not going to have the smoothest, fastest, you know, like most professional way of twisting these things. And right now, I'm fighting this platform, which is something I need to talk about. So, you know how I've mentioned that there are certain parts of this game that show their age? Well, this is one of them. Because in order to grab these pulley systems, you have to press the button and it's toggle. It's not hold. And I don't get that. I'm so used to hold on something like this that the amount of times I rotated this by accident just because I was trying to get the prince off the fucking switch and I couldn't do it. Because you press a button and he goes into that stance, and then you push around in the stance and then you press a button and he lets it go. And once you get used to it, it's a good system. It works fine. It's not a problem. It's just how they did it at the time. But because I'm so used to it being hold and not toggle, I spent a lot of times in the puzzles like rotating things a million times when I didn't want to, mean to, and I was getting really frustrated. Luckily, there's a crossfade there, guys, because all you have to do here is rotate this one, and it rotates the whole platform, and then you jump back towards the other one and then rotate that one. I'm certain though, guys, if you're struggling with this, and this video didn't help, there's going to be something on YouTube that shows you how to do this in 2 turns, in like 2 twists. There'll be somebody that's figured out the perfect and most streamlined way of doing it. That's not what I do, guys. I've got no interest in the puzzles. If it was up to me, ladies and gentlemen, if this game had a button that you could press to skip this entire puzzle, I would have done it. And it just goes to show how different I am as a as a player now than I used to be. My patience is not what it was for puzzles anymore. I used to love them, I used to adore them, but now I just find them fucking tedious and want to skip them. And shout out to Castlevania Lords of Shadow, because it actually let you do that. But here's the Alchemist again. There's another ring out. See how powerful that is? You barely have to fight him. And there's another fertile grounds, swiftly moving on. But it is interesting to see how you change in what you are willing to endure in video games. 10 years ago, I would have gladly taken puzzles and had a good time with them and enjoyed the process of figuring them out. But when it came to this project, every time those puzzles turned up, I got a little bit of a nostalgia of what it was, and then I just kind of groaned. And there's 2 other puzzles in this game that I find to be quite annoying as hell. They're not that they're that difficult, it's just that I don't like twisting things. Twisting 2 different levers to do 2 different actions to sync up 2 different things. Like, to me it's just a time sink, you know, it's just filling a void that could have been filled with something more interesting. And the parts of this game that I really like are the platforming and the fighting. The puzzles are there just to kind of tick the puzzle box, and I don't think that they're bad, and when you look at their design, I think that they're actually pretty damn good, all considered. They're simplistic, but they're also kind of brain-teasy too, so it's not the most obvious solution, and you can get there by completely fumbling around, or you can look at it logically and rationally and figure it out and see the matrix and have a good time. But once again, it ties into the idea of this game's balance. So I mentioned earlier on in this walkthrough that this game has a glaring flaw, and we've been playing for a while now and you've not been able to see it because I've obviously trimmed out the moments where it's happened. But this game refuses to let you die, and I have absolutely no idea why, because I think as much as if this game had killed you in 1 to 2 hits, like this fight right now, these fights turn up, you can avoid them if you want to. The tutorial is going to tell you to avoid them, and I'm going to try and fight all of them. If you see a section where there should be a fight and there is no fight, it means that I got hit, and when I respawned after closing the game, the fight was gone. So, if you're wondering why that happens, I'm not trying to duck the fights, guys, I'm actually trying to do them because I like the fighting. Even though the enemies are all kind of the same and they all have the same glaring weakness, which you've probably noticed so far, but if you haven't, I'll give you some more time to figure it out and then I'll talk about it later on. But this game won't let you die, and I feel like if this game had been punishing with its deaths, if it had made it so that everything kills you in 1 hit like Bushido Blade, I feel like it would have got a better reception. And I feel like if it wasn't so obsessed with saving you, I feel like this game was designed or directed by somebody who just had a kid. It's like the Cory Barlog thing, isn't it, where Cory has a child, creates a God of War about being a father, and the whole story of the game is about a man who is known for murder and brutality, trying his best not to send his son down the same path, trying to be the best father he can in a world that doesn't want him, where trouble always finds him, because he's not a very lucky guy, Kratos. And that stems from the fact that all the anxieties and the vulnerabilities of a new father, right? I think this game was made by somebody who had a really protective mother, or was a really protective mother. Because this is a game that wants to let you have fun, it wants to let you roam and kick around the land, but it's terrified that you're going to fall and break your leg. It's terrified that you're going to, like, trip into the street and get hit by a car. It just won't let you be you. It does everything it can to be like, oh, are you okay? I'm just here, oh, I'm just here. But you don't want it to be there, you know? It's that moment on learning to ride a bike where your mum or your dad has hold of the seat and you don't have the stabilizers on and you're pedaling and you're doing it and you think you're doing it, but they're still helping you, they're still keeping you balanced, they're still keeping you upright, and then they let go of the seat. This game never lets go of the seat, and it completely suffers because of it. And you might be wondering, Chris, what are you talking about? It doesn't look like it's doing that at all. It's because you're not seeing it. So, if I fuck a jump up here, if I jump off this vine and I fall off the world, I don't die. Elika saves me. She grabs my arm and she puts me back onto the platform, and I'm fine. There's no penalty at all. There's no cooldown. There's no 3 charges of time powers and then you're fucked, like the old games. Like right now, this what I'm doing here, that's a mistake. Didn't want to do that. I was pressing A too many times and I buffered an extra move. Like if I fall, she saves me. If an enemy hits me, I get a red screen and then I go into a wounded stance. If they hit me again, I die. But I don't die. Because Elika saves me. And this is the whole game. The whole time. Every single time you get into a bad position, you get into a losing situation, Elika saves you. And what this does is, it turns this game into something that anybody can play, no matter how young, no matter how incapable, and it enables that person to have the power fantasy of being the Prince of Persia without any of the skill, because Elika's always going to save you. And on that one side, it lets an entire swathe of people who couldn't enjoy this game, and I think that that's great. But there's the people that don't want to be saved, as we take on the fight here. And it leads to these situations of, I just want to die. And I know that sounds horrible, and you can't say that on YouTube because you'll probably get demonetized because they'll think it's suicide talk. But I just mean in the bloody video game, you know? There's nothing wrong with losing. There's nothing wrong with failing. Failing is a necessary step to learning to win, to learning to succeed, to learning to solve the puzzle. If you don't fail, victory doesn't mean anything. And that's the issue here. They completely neuter your ability to feel gratification for glory, because there's no glory to be had when it's gifted. Nobody wants stolen glory, and that's what this game is doing, and luckily it's not doing it with war medals, which is fucking disgusting, but it's doing it from your ability to play video games. And the irony here is, if you ever played Prince of Persia Sands of Time, Warrior Within, especially Warrior Within, Two Thrones, those games, really, really difficult. They were difficult games, made at the time when difficult games were actually difficult. Warrior Within, I got that the day it came out. I couldn't even beat the chick in the red dress, the second boss of the game. She kicked the living shit out of me, guys. I didn't know what was going on. I just couldn't beat her. I beat the chick with a nice ass on the boat at the start, and she beat me up a bit. And then I got to that temple, fought that woman. She whooped my ass. And I can almost see it now. I probably wasn't blocking. I probably wasn't parrying. I probably was mashing buttons because I was a younger player and probably nowhere near as skilled. But it was one of those things where I was so into that game, I didn't mind that it was shitting on me. Absolutely taking a big fat meaty turd right on my chest. And there was nothing I could do because I wasn't skillful or learned enough to do anything. And eventually, I beat it. I beat that boss. I figured it out. I started blocking and realizing I can't just wail on them and be the hero. I have to play smart because the game is hard. And then by the end of it, I'd beat the game. I'd found all the life upgrades. I'd beat the secret boss. I'd gone back and beat it on a harder difficulty. I'd beat it several times just because I liked the story and I liked the animations and I liked the game. Like it was a superb sense of growth, sense of improvement, and sense of satisfaction. And you'll never get that here. Even doing a run like this. Which I should talk about this because this is another one of those puzzles that I don't really like. So this segment here wants you to trigger a handful of switches, but it puts you into a zone that gives the impression that it's... See that right there? That was me buffering jump by accident, but I managed to get really lucky then. But this sequence here gives the impression that the corruption is going to kill you. And I actually standard in... that's not good English, is it? I standard? It's a new standard for bad English. Now, I stood in the corruption down here for ages because I didn't know if I was taking damage right now. So I stood around for like a whole minute to see if I was going to actually die, to see if the game was going to give me a fail state and have Elika save me. And nothing happened. So I took this as a sign that this was not damage. Because when you take damage on this game, you either get wiped and Elika saves you, or you get red on the edge of the screen. And I was really conscious when this moment happened that I couldn't do the game no damage. Because I thought that this was it. I thought as soon as it started going grey like this, I thought it was like chipping away at me with poison. And if you get the cheat engine, maybe it is. But I can confirm right now, guys, unless you use some kind of sequence break, you cannot get through this segment without getting exposed to this moment where the prince is coughing and his arms are getting covered in those purple veins and things and the corruption spreading. Like, you just can't do it. And as much as I want to cover this game and I wanted to make it more interesting by trying not to take a hit, I'm not going to, come up with some crazy sequence break to get around this whole sequence because the game was designed in a specific way. I'm not going to do that. There's no reason to, I do no damage as fun to make it more interesting to watch. I don't do it to wave my EP-ness and to tell you that I'm the best gamer in the world. Like, who the hell cares about this Prince of Persia when it comes to no damage? This is the easiest Prince of Persia, So it doesn't mean anything. But I love this game, and I think it's super fascinating. And that's the reason why this exists, guys. And I hope you enjoy the walkthrough. That was another manual save just then. And then I'm going to do a transition on the elevator so that you don't see me winding it. I do those moments so that you don't have to watch something you spend enough time watching yourself. And I hope that they're appreciated, because some people think that you just... Some people want to watch the cutscenes and they don't understand the concept of editing. My editing style has evolved over 10 years because, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, this is my 10th year on YouTube. You wouldn't think that, would you, with how crappy my channel is, but alas. Into the barrel. I do like these moments of this interesting perspective, and because all of this game is cel-shaded, it's scaling so well. If you're wondering, this game can get... I think it's capped at like 200 FPS, or it might be capped at 200 refresh rate, one of the two. So the game gets really good frames, all considered. It runs really nicely, and the only problem with it, I think, is something to do with its refresh rate. As we take on the Alchemist and I turn him around and go for the ring out. The Alchemist is kind of interesting. He has a couple of moves that will catch you off guard at first before you realise what's going on. But he dies really quickly if you bait him to the edge. You might not be able to tell in those moments if you've not played, but the movement in the combat sequences is kind of shitty. You can't run around freely or do kind of, circle strats or anything, because you are forced into this walking stance that automatically targets the enemy that you're fighting. And it's perfectly okay for doing the fights. That right there is a fast travel, guys. Once you've unlocked an area with the fertile grounds, you can fast travel between them, and I didn't want to waste your time by running around and, going through areas you'd seen before too many times. So if you ever see the screen go white like that, and I'm in a new area, it's because I fast travelled. And I don't think anybody's going to be following this walkthrough verbatim to try and get through the game, because the game is so fun and so accessible, you're probably having a whale of a time anyway. And this is the kind of game that I want to see nowadays. I want to see games where... just bring back that sense of... This game has a good concept. It has good platforming, good narrative. Its combat's not too shabby. There's a couple of puzzles. Go save the world. Like, where have those games gone, Ubisoft is so obsessed now with making these massive, just homogenized, ubiquitous open world bullshit that they've just lost that spark that I found so endearing that's captured in this game. Like, even this song right now, the music in this game is really nice. It's just got this wonderful sense of adventure, this sense of scope and scale, and it's just majestic. It really is, guys. It reminds me of why I love video games. It reminds me of the magic of a game coming out and just completely captivating you. Really, really cool. But I was talking about the movement speed in the combat. So, you can sidestep and you can walk around very slowly in your on-guard stance. If you press A, you'll do a quick dash in a direction of your choice, but the direction is only 4 directions. It's not omnidirectional, which means it can be really awkward trying to kite using the dash. And then when you press square, or when you press X on the Xbox controller... Oh, by the way, guys, I've kept the tutorial prompts up because I want to see how confusing they are. And I don't understand why the prompts tell you both the controller and the mouse to do the thing... And then the controller button isn't the button you should press, it's the colour of the button, and then a weird symbol. It's the most confusing system ever when you first look at it. Because this is something that's been mastered now. This is a part of UI design that no one fucks up anymore. And then you come back to this game when people were trying to be creative and weird with it, and it's just odd. And I love it because it's so goofy, but I would be lying if it didn't confuse the living shit out of me at first. But the movement, if you press X, you'll do a normal slash with the Prince. If you press A, you will do a momentum move. You'll do like a jumping move, an aerial or acrobatic move. And if you're a fan of the series, you'll recognize the A move as the way to win on Sands of Time, where you jump over the enemy's back and slash them as you do it. It was one of the most overpowered things in that game. And that's the move that you do here. And then if you press Y, you will introduce Elika and she'll do a magic attack. And what happens with the combat, guys, these combos that you're stringing together are just combinations of those buttons. So you will start off a combo by pressing slash, and then the game will pause in its like hit stun animation, and in that hit stun, you can press any of the other buttons, and you will go into the beginning of a unique combo. So you can do X into A, and then you'll be jumping, and then you'll press Y when it freezes, and then Elika will get involved, and then it'll freeze again to give you an opportunity to do something more, and you might press B, and then the B is the throwing move. So if you press B, the prince will grab the enemy, throw them into the air. Or if you're in the air, he'll grab the enemy, and he'll throw them into the ground. And you can combine all of these together, and I think you can do like a 14-hit combo if you do the perfect combo. And there's an achievement for doing it. But I'd completely forgot about that when I was recording this. I just went back and saw it. So you won't see me do that. But it involves doing, I think it's 4 X slashes into A, and then alternating between all the buttons back and forth in a big juggle. And it's a really cool technique too. And if you've 1000G'd the game or got the trophies, you'll have done it because you need to do that. And that's kind of how the combat works. You do your starter, you do your links, and then you try to do your ender. And if you do a long enough animation, you can do these unique enders where they give you a different camera perspective. And there's a whole host of different ones. You know, you can do an X string, an X chain, you can do X into midair and then another X chain to kind of slam them down and spike them. You can do an X string into an Elika ender, and an X string into a launcher, an X string into a throw, so on and so forth. And if you're willing to experiment, you can find a host of cool looking combos that are pretty similar and, you know, pretty kind of cut together, but still unique and different. And it does keep the combat kind of fresh and keeps you trying to find these new ways of doing cool things. And then you learn the situational things that you're going to need to get a lot better at ending fights as soon as they begin. So the first thing you realise is, if you attack them and they don't parry you, and you press B and you throw them into the air, you can press A to jump up after them, and then press like X to slash them into the sky, and then you can press Y with Elika and she'll jump up and hit them, and then you can jump up and hit them again. And when you do something along that lines, you get so much corner carry that you'll probably trigger the out of bounds animation where you mash the button, and then you just push them out of the ring. And you can do that to completely skip the standard enemies. Just get the first hit, launch them, corner carry, and then put them out of the ring. And then you'll notice on bosses, like the bosses where you can't get to the edge because there's some kind of corruption there, and it triggers that animation that's really annoying. Instead of, you know, just doing normal animations and seeing that all the time, which can happen, you can instead do a combo into Y, 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 and Elika will jump off the top of the boss and then start hitting them with magic from above. And because she's above them, attacking downwards, there's no knockback, so you don't push them into any of those triggers. And it doesn't sound complicated because it's not, but it's just an extra little bit of minutiae that you can be thinking about and discovering as you play. I think the reason people had such a hard time with the combat in this game is because I think that they were mashing the buttons. And I think that they were just wailing on them with the prince, and the enemies were parrying, and they weren't parrying the enemy's parry, they were just getting hit. So I think what was happening is people were mashing slashers, the enemy would parry them, and then they would mash roll to get away from the counter attack, and then they would mash attack again. And I don't think they quite understood that the time stops that are happening aren't the game slowing down, they're not the game having frame rate problems, it's the game's way of conveying to the player that you can press a button here, and it doesn't have to be the same button that you're pressing, and you'll do something different. It was the game's way of giving you combos and showing you the timing, and I think it was a really clever piece of visual language that was accessible and interesting. And I don't know if I'd seen it before at this point, but I thought it was really unique. It probably wasn't, but that's why I find it so interesting when I looked back on, you know, I didn't have the internet, I don't think, when this game came out. I might have just had it, just got the internet, so it was kind of a big deal. But I most certainly wasn't going on GameFAQs, and I weren't going on YouTube and stuff like that, because I wasn't doing that at that time. At that time, you know, when I got stuck on a game, I fixed it myself, and if that didn't work, I hoped one of my friends could fix it, or if they had the game that they knew what I was doing wrong. You know, that was just one of the things that you kind of did then. And then every so often you might Google something, or ask Jeeves, or whatever it was at the time, and try and figure it out. Remember CheatCC? Remember that website? Like, if you were lucky enough to get some help from those websites, that could have been cool. But I was just kind of playing, so I didn't really get the impression of how the game was being received. I thought it was great. I even have the limited edition box for this game, which was this cool, like, felt case that it came in. Because I was such a Prince of Persia fan back then. It's one of those things that it might not come across that much on my channel, because I haven't really covered the games at all. But I really, really loved the franchise, and it did hurt me when it went away. because I feel like it went away at the best possible time, didn't it? It got 3 really good games, each of them different, and then it stopped before it became the villain. It stopped before it became homogenous, recycled garbage, and I love that. I love the fact that it went out on such a high note. And then they tried to bring it back with this. It was a solid game, it was a fun game, it was an accessible game, but it just didn't hit the same numbers, I don't think. I just don't think it had the same appeal. This is me looking at the map right now there, guys. You can see also that it gives you the option to save. I'm removing the saves when I do them, guys. It doesn't mean I'm not doing them, and I recommend that you do, because if you can stand in the middle of a sequence, it means you don't have to do all the platforming again should you want to do this challenge of trying to take no damage. But coming over to this area and grabbing this wonderfully decorated pillar here. I think we're moving towards another encounter with potentially the concubine. I love the colours in this game as well. The colours and the detail and just the contrast of the colours as well. If you go towards the desert, the area where you buy the new abilities, there's such a wonderful hue of it's like a purple mixed with this cold icy blue. Like, there's so many different colours going on, and it's got this wonderful, like, iridescence to it. It's just wonderful art design and art direction. This guy won't attack. That's pretty rare. You'll notice, too, guys, that I always generally wait for the enemy to attack first. The reason for this is if you get aggressive in this game, because the game doesn't have a cover the distance kind of attack, it's an attack with limited range, and if you whiff it, you are in recovery. It can be really easy to overextend, miss, and then the enemy just one-frames you. So you want to be super careful. But that fight that we just did then had introduced a mechanic which you might have spotted if you know what you're doing. So if an enemy is black like that and covered in corruption, it means that you have to hit them with Elica first. If you hit them with anything else, they're going to deflect you and they're going to probably start attacking you. So the game is quite accessible, it's quite simplistic, it's for players of every level, and this is the game's way of adding a little measure of complexity. So I was speaking about previously the idea that I think the people that played the game probably just mashing and not doing any of the combos and not trying to do anything interesting. That's an enemy that's designed to stop you doing that. And we always say, don't we, when it comes to video games, the enemies themselves have to challenge the player. They have to force the player out of their comfort zone. They have to stop the player from spamming whatever the safe bullshit is the player wants to spam. Oh, this fight here, guys, if you stun the warrior and then slide under him, you can push him towards the wall, and you can even just parry him and go immediately into A there and then do an Elica combo on his back, and you'll probably trigger the proximity of the animation coming up here. And the animation is, this is a different one, and I got it wrong there because I didn't expect it. And if you get both of those wrong, you'll take damage. But I quite like the idea of the quick time events being quick like that and being quite punishing if you get them wrong. This game could have been really challenging if it was as punishing as it could have been. If this was even remotely close to Warrior Within, this game would have kicked your ass, because that game was really difficult. I can't wait to go back to see how hard it actually is. But when I was young and I was playing that game, it whooped my ass. But here's the animation. You have to do this in a few of the different corners, and as much as it's not the most interesting mechanic here, because you have to do it this way, there's no other way it seems, it is good practice for getting used to being comfortable with the warrior. You need to be comfortable with this character because the final encounter with him is going to make you get up close and personal for a long time. And I just kind of parried him because I didn't really have an answer. And it's got a really frustrating checkpoint too if you want to do no damage, so I just recommend being as resolute as you can, parrying the shit out of him and getting rid of it really quickly. This guy moves super slow too. Sometimes his scripting will try to circle you like this, and if he does that, you want to move a little bit because it means he's going to walk into a wall and not come towards you, and you don't want that because it just leads to annoyance. But keep parrying him, keep pushing him, and there's the cutscene. I really like the UI on this game too. The health bar on this is really nice. Watch this satisfying chunk that we're going to take out of him. Now look at that, big old chunk coming off that life bar. The only way that it could be better, in my opinion, is if you could see what the life bar was before as it drains, and then the damage that you've done gradually comes down. I like to see the impression of a chunk, and I like a nice contrast. If I were to go in there as an artist and redesign that, I would add that decay of the original life bar position and I would make it red. I would give it that huge red chunk, because there's just something about a big old red chunk in an action game that makes you feel so powerful. It's beautiful language. But for 2009, it's not bad. You know, it's doing its job. But let's finish him off, shall we? Put him against the wall. Go into the tapping animation. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, these tapping moments, if you do not tap, you will lose. The very first one I did, I was relaxing, just, you know, casually tapping it with my thumb, half-assing it, and I lost and I took damage. So don't underestimate those moments. Another thing to bear in mind as well, this is specific to the warrior. Those segments only happen if you have Elika with you. And then later on in the game, there comes enemies that if you try to attack with Elika when they have a certain barrier up, they will throw her aside. And I did a little bit of testing with that particular form of the enemies to see if I could get them to throw her off the edge. And it doesn't work. They throw her off the edge, but she just teleports to an area where she's like in the middle of the arena. And what it is it's a punishment for using the wrong move. And then you have to walk up to Elika, and then she'll gradually wake up when you stand near her and she'll join you and fight. But if you have her on the ground knocked out, and you go to do that animation on the warrior, it won't work because she won't be there to help you. And I think that that's actually pretty clever. Because in a lot of games, if you were to do that animation, because it's a canned animation, she'd just teleport and be part of the QuickTime event. But Ubisoft took the time here to make it so that if you just mess around and you get Elika stunned, she's not going to be there to finish off the boss, and you're going to lose a damage opportunity. And I had a moment where I did that very thing, and I ended up taking damage and had to reset, and I lost a lot of progress and had to play for 10 more minutes, you know, to get back to where I was. And it was a punishment. It was the closest the game had come to a punishment. Unfortunately, it's because of my own stipulations and the way that I'm playing the game, and it just gives you an idea of what the game could have been like if it was more eager to kill you. Like, just look at the games that followed this. Demon Souls, Dark Souls, these games that everybody talks about for difficulty, for being punishing, for being satisfying because they kill you, because they're not afraid to fuck you up. And everybody talks about those games, you know? This game could have had that appeal if they'd have just had the balls to kill the player. And I'm not asking for everything to be Dark Souls. If anything, I want nothing to be Dark Souls anymore. I want Dark Souls to stop. I want the new thing to happen, you know? It's been 10 years, guys, since the bloody Demon Souls and Dark Souls rocked up. It'd be really nice if the equivalent of those games would turn up now. Some fresh new IP that changes how we think about game design, changes how modern gamers and casual gamers think about difficulty. Because people think that Dark Souls invented difficulty, which is insane. But it's just ignorance, you know? That's how powerful that game is. That game is so powerful that people believe it's done all these things it didn't do. You know, it's just another one of those great installments in a long line of games that weren't afraid to kick your ass. And these moments there, guys, whenever the screen goes black and white like that, it means that you want to press Y to make Elika do the double jump. And she'll come in there and she'll assist you. Those moments are surprisingly dynamic. They can lead to some really goofy interactions. And they're not scripted either. It's the game engine that dictates when those moments happen. Because you can get into situations where you'll do an ambitious jump, and the game will tell you to use Elika to save you. Because if you don't, you're going to die. But you don't, and you make the jump. So if you jump a certain depth, maybe, a certain length, I think the game tells you, yo dog, use Elika quickly, or this could end badly. And I think that's kind of interesting that it kind of always applies at all times, rather than it just being, here's a pole swing, here's another pole swing, here's a pillar, and here's an Elika jump. Which I wouldn't be surprised if that was absolutely the case as well. But there goes the fertile grounds being cleansed. And I want to talk about that actually, as we get 170 light seeds and we travel all the way back here to the temple. So when you do this, you're going to get attacked by Elika's father. He fights very similar to everything in this game. Once again, guys, you might notice the huge glaring weakness of almost every enemy and every boss. I'm not going to say what it is just yet. I'm going to give you a little bit longer. But at this point, it's been very obvious if you know anything about combat systems or if you play any kind of action game at a long period. But we're just going to body this guy real quick, and then we're going to get our new ability. And I'm not going to be showing you myself picking up all the light seeds, because it would have made this walkthrough way longer than it needed to be. and this is just meant to be a fun project, and I would be surprised if many people even watch it, because this is not the most popular Prince of Persia. My channel's not the most popular channel, and this game is not a game that needs a walkthrough. It's just a really, really fun game, and it looks absolutely beautiful on PC in spite of its age. In one of those rare PC ports that isn't colossal dog shit in spite of that stupid loading problem it has. But let's talk about the inspiration that I think that this game is obviously shelving and showing very proudly on that shelf. The two games that jump out to me, the first one is Shadow of the Colossus. Shadow of the Colossus is a game that came out and changed a lot of things for very, very good reasons. And it's an amazing game. All games should be inspired by that game because it did wonderful things. There's such a sense of that awe and grandeur that's in that game, and then there are certain story beats that are happening in this game that I'm not going to spoil for people that are very comparable to Wander's journey through that forbidden land, and we're also in a forbidden land as well, so you know there's a lot of parallels between those two games. So if you were to ask the director, I'm almost certain he would say that this is absolutely a post-Shadow of the Colossus game, because it shows so many telltale signs of appreciation of what that game did, and I think that that's a great thing to be inspired by, and I personally love it. And then the second one, which is a bit more on the nose, a little bit less thematic, is Okami. And Okami came out, I think, didn't Okami come out, was it 2006? I think Okami came out for the PS2. And in Okami, you went around areas like bringing back the nature, didn't you? Revitalizing the lands because they were being threatened by a great evil. And in that game, what you would do is you would draw your paintbrush around plants and things, and you would make them blossom. And you would make the ground come back to normal and get rid of corruption in many ways. And I think you can see where this is going. You know, in this game, when you go to those fertile lands, you turn this grim landscape, this hellscape of just corruption and evil, and you turn it into this wonderful, bountiful, idyllic land again. And it's very colourful, and it's very full of flowers, and it's just like that wonderful halcyon vision of a childhood summer, and it's done really well. But it has to be inspired, potentially by the journey that Amaterasu took there, maybe. And you could even say Mario Sunshine as well, couldn't you? Because in Mario Sunshine, you go around the island trying to get rid of all the ink and the paint. And in this game, we're going around getting rid of a bunch of inky paint. But that one's just come to me just then when I was talking about cleansing the land. But I think you get what I mean, right? So those are the two inspirations I think that are really, really quite apparent. And then here is the game contextualizing this particular formation that the boss is using. So hit it with Elika to get rid of the magic, and then come in and do your enders and do your combo. Right then, I could have done a B at the end of that, but I pressed the wrong button, and that's why I didn't relaunch the boss. And this is also an arena where we can't ring out the hunter, and when we get to the edge of the arena, it goes into a canned animation that doesn't do that much damage and just kind of frustrates you. So in a fight like that, guys, you want to do verticality if you can, or just do standard heavy-hitting combos that don't have too much corner carry. And then here we go, the hunter introducing one of the first environmental hazards on your platforming. So if you platform at the wrong time and you touch the corruption that's creeping around here, you will just instantly wipe. You'll get saved by Elika, it will reset you back on the platform where you started, and that's the end of it. The thing here is, though, if you've played enough platformers at this point, you've probably played them all, you'll know that these enemies all work on the same routine, they're all on the same cycle, so if you can go while one of them is out of the way, it usually translates to that none of them will move into your path when you continue at the same speed. And it's one of the biggest weaknesses, but also one of the nicest designs in any kind of moment like this, because it's complete safety. You know that the moment you start moving on the right cycle, you'll be able to get past everything as long as you go immediately. And this is the type of thing that when you play this as a kid, you don't know this. You don't understand how this stuff works. So when you're doing this as a kid, you probably wait a long time so that nothing can touch you, and you make sure it's across the other side and then you go. You overthink the living shit out of it. But when you come back a little bit more experienced, a little wiser, you realise that as soon as they give you that opening, you now have an opening for the rest of it. And I'm glad it works like that, because if it intentionally tried its best to catch you out, it would be fucking annoying. And if it was random, it would make replays kind of frustrating, or maybe give it more replay value depending on your perspective. But here is the Hunter again. He's got half HP this time because we just fought him down there. This is the fertile grounds. Look how defensive he is right now. But there's his attack. Get the parry, going to the string, going to the jump over, launch him up into the air. Didn't confirm anything because I was pressing the wrong button just then. Which is unfortunate. That could have been pretty cool. I don't think we've seen that one just yet. Am I going to go for it again? And here's the ring out. Is he going to move though? Nope, he's gone. See you later, Hunter. I'd just like to say as well, I love the enemy designs in this game for the Corrupted. If you go into the game's extras, you can see the gallery and you can see the concept art. Whoever did the concept art for this game, it's absolutely superb. It is such a great combination of an inky freehand technique with extreme detail and just really, really good colour balance, because it's got those pops of colour from their uniforms that give them all that unique type of identity, but also makes it very clear that they're part of this corrupted group. And each of them has a dominant colour that you'll notice, you know, that really makes them pop. It's just really clever and really good design, and I love the art of this game. I've not really had a chance to talk about that too much, other than just saying that it's a gorgeous game and it looks so good on my monitor. And my monitor is not kind, guys. Like, I watch trailers for games that aren't even out and they look like dog shit on my monitor. And then when I was playing this with all the colours and just the fluidity and all the detail too, like, you know, when you look at the textures on the trousers of the prince and the boots he's wearing, and you can see how they've done their best to really give them that illusion of depth and that feel of texture. They've really grounded a lot of the materials, and it just works so well, especially with more modern hardware. Like, just the texture of his cape. He's wearing this awesome cape that's got a dragon on it. I was going to save then, guys, and then I thought against it, because sometimes when you save and you get hit and you come back, the enemies disappear. And I really didn't want to disappear all the enemies because it's just not what I want to do, but the checkpoints and the dying in this game it's just not there. One thing that I do find quite interesting in this is, if you remember the old Prince of Persias, a huge part of that series, especially Warrior Within, was taking weapons off the enemy. So in Warrior Within, you had a one-handed sword, and you upgraded it through the game. But every so often when you fought people, you could pick up what they were using, and you could get this awesome arsenal of sidearms, and the prince would use two weapons at the same time, and it led to all these really cool combos and these awesome animations and some really cool executions. I feel like this game could have added an extra element to that. It could have given you perhaps a button input where you press two buttons at the same time, like a fighting game throw technique, and you stole the baddie's weapon. Like, if you could parry them and then hit them and get them stunned, you could steal their weapon and then go into exclusive weapon combos. And then maybe some of the enemies could have been barehanded and have completely different movesets when they're barehanded, and make them even more dangerous, perhaps. More desperate, you know, like the IS ninjas when they lose a limb. That could have been really cool. Because the thing with the enemies, I'm going to tell you now, guys, you already know, you're very alert people, you're all god gamers, I trust you, is every single thing in this game attacks the frame it starts moving. So you never have to learn timing. You never have to learn any kind of intricate timing. You're never going to get tripped up by bait moves. Every enemy starts moving and then swings. And their moves are fast. So the moment this guy moves, he's going to hit me. Every time. And he'll always do it. So all I have to do is wait for his body to move, and I press block, and I'll parry him every time. And it works on every boss. Like, everything in the game swings quickly and swings immediately when they move. And because of that, the game can become a lot easier than it might have originally seemed. And that is one of the areas where the combat could have easily been shifted, and it would be a far better experience and a far more interesting fighting system. Make it so that the enemies have got three openers. Make one really fast, make one appear fast and be really slow, or be normal speed, and then make one that is ludicrously slow, but has armor. If you do that, you immediately make it so that I have to do something to deal with them, instead of just parrying everything on reaction effortlessly when I've never seen the move before. I've not played this game for 10 years, guys. I didn't do a practice run, I just started recording, and because the game is so intuitive and so easy to pick up and accessible, I was able to just have a lot of fun with it. I mean, if you're really good at this game and you've been playing it for 10 years, you're probably watching this and thinking this gameplay is garbage. And fair play to you, man, it probably is. But I had a lot of fun, and it was the best I could do. And, you know, that's kind of what my channel's all about, guys. I come back to games, I have a go at them, I do what I can do with the time that I have, and hopefully it can help or entertain, and you guys get to watch it and enjoy it. And if you're watching this thinking this looks like fun... Oh, by the way, I haven't mentioned as well, this is the other plate. This is the red plate. This is where the plate is just, we couldn't come up with something, so we'll just make it put you from one place to another place. The red plate is the equivalent of like a loading zone. It really is. It's the equivalent of walking into a white light and then coming out in a different space. The only difference is you press Y on a red plate and it springboards you across the world to another red plate. It's just the complete opposite of gameplay. But at this time, it was a lot more accessible to do that. It was okay to do things like that, you know? It still looked fancy, we were still easily wowed, and thus, this plate became a feature, even though it's far too simplistic. And then this puzzle here, guys, this is another one of those puzzles that can be really annoying if you don't see it, and I don't have the perfect strategy, so I'm just going to show you what you need to do. You need to get it so that these two parts are moving in unison, and are one away from the objective, and then you can rotate them both at the same time. And you move one of the lever systems, one of the turntables, and it moves one block, and you move the other one, and it moves the mechanism. And you just use that to get the puzzle done. Once again, guys, this is not meant to be a walkthrough to help you do the puzzles. The puzzles are something that are just head scratchers. You can bang your head against them for 5 minutes, and you'll get them. And if you're super frustrated, I'm sure there's somebody on YouTube that's got them in 2 turns, the perfect, easiest strategy ever. Just find that video and thumb that video up, because I just don't have the patience to give a fuck anymore. Like, if this was a fight, I would take as long as it took to make it and do it the way I want to do it, but when it comes to turning puzzles, I don't have it in me anymore. And this entire area before we take on the boss... this was me dying on the wall, guys, and having to be transitioned back. So if you're wondering what that crossfade was, guys. And I'm trying my best now on the videos to be as forward with transitions and with crossfades as I can be, because I don't want to give people the wrong impression. You know, I've never made these videos, guys, to lie to you. I've never made videos to essentially do things in video games by being deceptive and by being, you know, underhanded. It's not my intention at all. You know, I don't want people to think that I'm the best gamer in the world and that I do everything in one attempt and I just react immediately and do the right thing every single time. It's not true. It's never been true, you know. And unfortunately, the internet is full of people that aren't as media aware as other people, so they watch these videos and they think that that's just how it works. It's not, guys. It's not. You know, don't put yourself down because you're getting your ass kicked or because you can't do it. All that means is you're playing the game, you know, you're learning. And everybody learned at some point, and everybody gets their ass kicked, because you have to get your ass kicked in order to learn to not get your ass kicked. And even then, depending on the game and depending on how hard it is, you still might get your ass kicked. Especially by puzzles when you're getting older and you're losing your patience, apparently. But this is a weird one, this, because it's got the corruption in the room, giving you the impression of a ticking clock, like the corruption's going to get you. But you're never in any danger here. There's no pressure from time or from... You know, there's no agitator making this worse than it needs to be. The only real agitator is how the controls work and the puzzle itself. And probably how tedious the red plate is, all considered. But when you think about it, the one cool thing about the red plate is it gives the developers the opportunity to make weird worlds. Because you don't have to make them link, do you? If you have the ability to move the player from one position to another to another position, and they don't have to do it themselves, so you don't have to link it and link it logically and artistically, you can just make it as fancy and as crazy as you want it to be, and then the player will just whiz around it and boom, they're where they need to be. So in some ways, it allows the architecture to be more ambitious and less logical, but it also comes across as a little cheaper. And I don't know which one I prefer, because I love the idea of making worlds more fantastical, but if it comes at the lack of player agency, I think it hurts the game in the end. As we push forward to the top of this tower. This jump's interesting here too. Just then, he didn't grab the edge, and it gave me the impression I was going the wrong way. I wasn't, I just shouldn't have mashed A. Once again, guys, old habits die hard unless you kick them. And this game is an old school game, so it just doesn't work like a lot of modern platformers do. And that's for the better though. I think the platforming in this game is better than 90% of the games that I've played recently. Like, Prince of Persia was really ahead of its time with its movement and its platforming. And it was one of the reasons I always hated Uncharted's platforming, because as much as it was artistically phenomenal with its, visual language and its design, it never felt good. And I think it didn't feel good for me because I was so used to Prince of Persia. And you do know, when I go back to those old games, I'm going to think that the platforming is aged horrendously, and I'm going to wonder what I'm talking about. But I just remember it so fondly and so vividly. Oh, here's a new move. So right there, he spits in your eyes, and he blinds you a little bit, but you can still totally see, so it's not that big of a deal. And just look how much this guy's parrying too. Dude parries repeatedly. So I go into a combo instead. And I do just a string between me and Elika there, and then he goes into the powered up mode right now. So this mode here, if I use Elika, he will toss her aside. He didn't do it though. On that mode, you just want to attack him normally, and then as soon as it fades, you can do the Elika move if you want to. But I'm trying to do some different combinations here, and it's just not really working. Because I'm not pressing the right buttons. It's not the game's fault, it's my knowledge. But here's a juggle. Put him down. He goes into the corruption form, spits in my face. I do like that the spit that he does cashes in whatever his buff is. I think that's a really clever idea, that. I don't think it should, because I feel like the game is giving you way too much, But that's because this game is too balanced. It's way too balanced. It's kind of, oh, there it was! I've been waiting to show that. So that's what happens when they're in the blue state if you try to use Elika on them without hitting them first. They throw her away and now you can't use her. And to get her back you have to stand near her. But I'm not going to do it because I wanted to fight this guy without her to see if it was any different. Because I was doing a lot of testing. Like right now I can't hit him. But then he spits at me and I can hit him, so I'm okay. That's me picking her up. And there she is doing her attack. That would not have worked, that, if she wasn't with me. And then it cuts the fight short because we've injured him and he's going to run away. And now all we need to do is make our way to the fertile grounds. Oh, those loops there, if you don't know, guys. When you go towards those loops on a wall run or on a climb like that, you have to press B for the prince to engage with it. If you don't press B, he'll grab it and then just drop it. And it's not a big thing, but it's enough to keep you in the game while you're platforming. And that's what the platforming is in this game. It's this really nice harmony of great visual language and mild player input. So you'll press A to do the jump. That was another one of those quick travels here, guys, to go to the next area as we collect more light seeds and cleanse more lands. But like, you'll see a gap, so you press A to jump. You'll see a pillar, so you'll jump towards it. You'll scale around the pillar, you'll jump from the pillar to a wall. You'll scuttle up the wall, you'll see a loop, you'll press B. The loop will throw you up. You press A again, you'll mantle. All of this is just, as soon as you see what's happening on the screen, your brain knows what's to do. Because it knows when to press Y, it knows when to press B, it knows when to press A, it knows when to wall run. All of this is established. And then all the game does is it creates these beautiful looking environments with all this wonderful geometry, and it just chains these simple motions between each of them. And I know that I'm stating the complete opposite, the complete obvious, words. This is very obvious to anybody who's played a lot of games. But I think we can take this for granted. We can take for granted just how engaged we are in this moment. And especially in modern times, because platforming now is so automatic, it makes this look like the most technical thing you've ever done. It makes this look like playing the piano accordion. Just insanity of complexity for the average person that's not learned in it. And there we go. That was me trying to get him to throw her off the edge, but he didn't. He threw her to the side, but it wasn't enough. And all you do here is attack him. And when you attack him, he loses his buff. You see that? Loses his state, and then we can just whoop his ass. Some enemies, I think, can also heal too. So if you see enemies glowing and they've got this kind of like crazy undulating aura, it means that they're getting their life back. But an enemy like this, as soon as you put him to the edge of the world, you'll trigger an instant kill move and you'll ring him out, so it really doesn't matter. But this is at the point where I'm trying to see if I can do some silly things with Elika getting tossed around, and I don't think I find anything goofy, but it's just funny to see them just cast her aside so quickly. That was close. Luckily, I was able to recover there and do a bit of platforming that's perhaps not intended but works anyway because the game's just immaculately designed. And that's something I want to talk about too. I've mentioned that the arenas are beautiful and the geometry is beautiful, and I love the way the world lingers together, and I love the themes of the worlds and what they have you doing in them. It keeps the platforming fresh, it keeps the sense of exploration high. One thing that I think this game suffers from, and I think that Okami suffers from as well, whenever you make a game where you have to corrupt a landscape and you have to give the impression of a spreading evil and a looming threat, you have to use less colourful and interesting palettes. So look at this world, right? This world is piss yellow, everything is brown, everything is like earth shaded, everything's burnt sienna, everything looks like a festival toilet, and it has to by virtue of this area being corrupted and losing sight, right? And what it does is, by making the game look kind of bad and ugly and like Quake on PC back in 1996 or whatever, when you cleanse it, it has this beautiful contrast, this wonderful contrast of, oh my god, this place looked like something was pissing in my eyes, and now it looks like this wonderful, hopeful, optimistic area. That's the heal. See his HP? The good thing here is, it doesn't matter, because the fights aren't difficult. The fights are what they are. The camera is what it is as well. Be careful of the camera, guys. Sometimes it can not be your friend. I love how the Alchemist just casually getting juggled in the background. And he's running away and cursing the prince because we're beating him. So now we're going to be cursed with this horrible screen effect. Thanks. And what I was saying there, guys, that the little topic I was going into before I got distracted, as I often do, is I feel like making your game look like this hurts it. I think it hurts the enjoyment in the moment a little bit. And I'm not often a person that speaks of things like this because thematically it makes sense, tonally it makes sense, visually it makes sense. And it's effective. It's very effective, it's very evocative. Do not step in that sludge, by the way, it kills you. I did it. Not fun. But when you're here, it can be really easy to kinda not enjoy the game as much. And I know this sounds crazy and you might not get this, you might understand exactly what I mean, but there's something about making a beautiful game ugly intentionally that I think can have a damage that is just unavoidable. And I don't think it should be different. I really don't, because it's there for a reason and it makes a lot of sense. But when you're moving through this game and it's bright and it's colourful, it feels so amazing, it feels so relaxing and just nostalgic, and video games and Indiana Jones. And then when you go into a place like this where it's all not so good looking, even though, you know, visually it's very effective, it can be easy to not have as much fun. And it's one of those weird things that, for me, kind of hurts the game. And I know that it's a crazy reason when you think about it, and it's just one of those things, but for some reason, stylistically, and it was the same in Okami, guys. In the areas of Okami where it wasn't as colourful and it wasn't as Okami-esque, I kind of felt myself getting just a little bit blasé when I was playing. And then I'd cleanse the land, or I'd bring back the life and bring back the beauty, and it'd just win me over again and romanticize me. But leave a comment if you know what I mean, guys, if you feel the same. As we move on here and do some platforming. This curse is interesting too, because once again, I had worries when it was happening that it was going to damage me, and it was going to hurt me, and it was going to make no damage, pointless. And I would have still finished the project and just called it a walkthrough. But I wanted to make it more interesting by making it so that I don't get hit by the enemies. Because the platforming stuff is secondary in my concern, it's more so fighting the dudes. This is one of the areas I really dislike as well, the Kruger slide. Don't get me wrong, I love the idea of it, I love the visual of it, but it's too slow, it's unwieldy, and it makes the game feel a lot more dated than it is, because you just don't descend that slowly anymore in modern games, so when you do, it's really noticeable. Which leads me on to one of the areas of the game that is the most dated. And I'm hoping if you've been paying attention, or if you've been watching, you might just be listening. I know a lot of people like to listen to my walkthroughs instead of watching them because they like the discussion. Well, this game has a compromised sense of speed. And it's not the game's fault. And I don't know if it's tied to hardware limitations. I don't know if it's tied to performance limitations. Look how beautiful this looks now, though. I don't know exactly what it is. Because it's obviously intentional, and it might just be that was the speed of games at this point, and that's how we did things. That transition there, guys, is another fast travel to a different area, and instead of me showing you platforming through a zone I've platformed through before, I skip to the area where the fight was in this traversal, and we'll carry on as normal. This is not a difficult game to navigate, guys. It's got a waypoint, you'll never get lost. It's really superb for that. But you've been watching now for about an hour and a half, or listening, and you're seeing me do the platforming. The one area of the platforming where the speed is ahead of its time and quite modern and just quite exceptional is when you have Elika on your back and you're grabbing the vines. Everything else it's about 33% slower than it should be. So when I wall run, watch my wall run, right? That one looked really fast. There's some interesting visual language on the wall run as well, which I love. But the wall run, by today's standards, feels a little slow. At the time, it was fine. And it still is fine, but you might notice when you come to this that it does seem like he's meticulously running on the wall. And then when you do the interaction with the plates, which we're about to do in a moment, watch how long it takes me to interact with this plate when I get on it. So there's a transition of some dialogue. So watch this, right? Press Y. Took a while, didn't it? And then it flies us across in a very dramatic, ethereal, airy way, but it's very floaty. Super floaty, right? Losing that sense of speed and momentum. Watch it again. Very delicate, floaty, but not fast. And watch this. Delay, 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 and then boom. A little bit faster, that one. That one kind of floaty. If this was released now, all of these animations would be faster. Because the sense of speed and immediacy now, because of people's attention spans, is far greater. And I don't have a problem with the speed of this game. I think it's got this wonderful kind of rhythmic cadence to it. But I absolutely think that there are parts of it where it comes across as a little slow. And the huge area is when you're descending. In this game, when you're ascending, when you're climbing, you won't see too many areas that have aged that much. You're going to see a platformer that's confident, that's in its stride, that's doing a really good job. But when you descend, it's fucking awkward. It's awkward, it's gangly, and it's slow. And there's not too much evidence of it because you only descend in 2 areas. And I'm really happy. And I'm telling you now, guys, if this game had come out today, the claw drag, the Kruger slide, would be so much faster than it is in this game. Look how fast in Assassin's Creed now you slide down things. You know, look how fast in any action game with platforming elements, how fast you like slide down poles and stuff, and how you streak down walls. It's just so different. But here's a tricky fight. This is the Alchemist again, but we're surrounded by corruption, and he can go into the corrupted mode, into the healing mode, and into the I don't like Elika, so I'm going to toss her aside mode. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try my best not to proc these animations because they don't help. All it is wasting time, and they're really easy to trigger. It's kind of frustrating, actually. But this is easily the most difficult Alchemist fight so far. And here I'm going to do the Elika hit down direction into ending with the Prince, which is kind of a cool one. I don't think we've seen that one just yet. And here he goes healing. You can attack him here if you want to, but I'm going to wait for him to do his telegraph. And then I'm going to parry it and then go into the juggle. And again, I do the corner carry because I'm so used to doing it. And all it does is make that animation turn up. There's the attack, there's the parry. Elika goes forward, we jump over into Elika again, into Elika on the ender there. And then he teleports into the corruption. And then he goes into the corruption mode. There's the parry, into Elika, into the slide. Oh no, throw him up. Into the... I thought that would maybe kill him, but it didn't. I don't know the damage thresholds in this game at all. I've mentioned this earlier. Sometimes you do a lot of damage, sometimes you don't. And I don't really understand how the scaling works. I did a little bit of Googling to try and find what combos do what damage and what's the most damage, what's the least damage. You know, stuff like that. See what the hits do and if it's diminished returns or scaling on the lengthier the combo. But it just seems like sometimes you do nuclear damage and sometimes you don't. And there's probably somebody out there that has the answer to that, which is really, really cool, but unfortunately it's a little bit too late because I've already recorded the walkthrough now. But it would have been cool information to have and to share with you people. But maybe somebody in the comments will chirp up and share some data mining as we cleanse another land and continue on our journey. Look how beautiful this looks too. Look how warm the colour palette is. It's so warm, dude. It's got that wonderful like Mediterranean feel to it, that almost Greek air, you know, that Aegean colour palette going on, and then you look at the sky and it's still piss yellow, piss green. But the music with the flutes and everything going on, just wonderful music, wonderful sense of adventure, wonderful sense of magic. Ooh, we've also unlocked the area where we can go and seal away the Alchemist for good. So that's what we're going to go and do now, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to finally finish the Alchemist off, and you won't see him again. This will be our final battle. Look at this, though, for speed. Look at the speed of the sliding. Do you see how methodical and how intentional the sliding speed is? Do you get the impression that I was trying to convince you of before? That this is a game that it has this intentional sluggishness to it, which I don't know if it's to emphasize animations or give the sense of weight, but if this came out now, I just feel like it would be like, do you see how floaty that jump was just then? Like, there's no... This is pretty shifty, though. This is really fast, this animation. That animation's so cool. It doesn't make any sense. I don't get it at all, but I do love it. But it does have that sense of... There is an intentional slowdown to this game that would not exist if it were more modern. And I think I'm going to talk about that. I said at the start of this that I think this game was about 10 years ahead of its time. You might be curious of what I meant by that, and I also mentioned the Sekiro influences, where this game, in many ways, in how its combat is structured, when it comes to its reprising and its defending, it has that emphasis on parrying that went on to make that game so popular. Although this game does do it differently, and Sekiro does it its own way, I feel like if this game had killed you in one hit, people would have respected it a hell of a lot more, especially now. Especially now dying in games has become acceptable and become the thing that Dark Souls invented. Which is really funny to me because... Can you imagine what these people would do on Ninja Gaiden? Can you imagine what these people would do on Ninja Gaiden on the SNES? Not the SNES, sorry, on the NES. Unbelievable, right? People wouldn't know they were born. But I think that this game was 10 years ahead of its time in many ways. And the biggest thing for me that really kicks it off is the accessibility. So 10 years ago, guys, or I suppose you should say 12 years ago, I didn't have a YouTube channel, and video games were tough. They weren't as tough as they were 10 years before that, but they're a damn sight tougher than they were 10 years after that. So 2009, we have games coming out that are legitimately still taxing, legitimately still demanding, and not everybody gets to play them. Not everybody gets to play them, not everybody gets to beat them, not everybody sees the credits. Video games needed walkthroughs then. They needed somebody to help you get through the game if you couldn't do it yourself. That's why GameFAQs was so popular. That's why NeoGAF was so popular. That's why YouTube blew up. Because people decided to make videos to try and help other people learn from their mistakes. And it was a wonderful time of people sharing experiences, tech and gameplay and commentary, which would later on, become the standard. Games now don't need walkthroughs. They don't need walkthroughs, they don't need gameplay, they don't need anything, because the games are so fucking easy and so brain dead that they play themselves. So unless you're playing a very niche, fringe genre or indie game that relishes on what games used to be and how fun it used to be when you earned things in games instead of being given everything, if you're not playing those games or some kind of multiplayer game against other humans, video games right now are so brain dead and so easy and so accessible and so overwhelmingly mothering that they're impossible to have a bad time with when it comes to failing and suffering and losing. We don't lose anymore. We don't get bodied. We don't get beat down. We don't rage quit. It's not what gaming is anymore. Because gaming has gone from something that only a few people could do and everybody else did it very casually and didn't understand how anybody could do it. It was quite demonized, actually. Vilified. To now gaming is so cool that everybody does it. Everybody does it. And when everybody does something, they have to put silica packets that say do not eat. Because when you have a large amount of people doing something, you can't have that thing being only for the top 10%. You can't have that thing being so punishingly difficult, so demanding of mastery and time and attention that most players will never see the end. You can't do that anymore, because that is not a good investment. And video games are an investment. They are funded by investors that demand a ridiculous return. And now video games have got so expensive. Video games now are the most expensive they've ever been when it comes to production. That has essentially forced out all the mid-tiers of development. So these days you don't get B-tier games, C-tier games, D-tier games that often. And when you do, they're highly specific and probably from some European country. So all you have now is AAA and indie. And indie games are all trying to milk your nostalgia, because nostalgia is a very powerful thing, and everybody remembers when games were really cool and really fun, and they want to relive those memories. So you've got people that are losing themselves in this illusion of modern gaming, which is essentially their own childhood as an adult. And then you have games that are so expensive, that are so demanding on their returns, that need to succeed so heavily that they're terrified to do anything that doesn't sell. So everything in those games is designed for the weakest, lowest ability player imaginable. So you never lose, you never get beaten up, you never get bodied, everything's given to you, everything's simple, everybody can do everything immediately. And there's no growth, there's no skill ceiling, there's no skill floor, there's no skill. They're just these interactive movies that make you feel good. And there's nothing wrong with that, fundamentally. The problem is, games didn't used to be like that. Games used to be like this. And this was a game being like that at the time. This game to me proves you can have accessibility, you can let everybody win, at a time where most games are forcing you to lose until you learn to win. So this game to me is a beacon of we can have it both ways. Right now, we don't have it both ways. We have it one way. You have to try really hard to find the experience you're looking for if you value how games used to be. If you play games for gameplay, if you're more of an arcadey player, if you like higher difficulties, if you like complicated systems that need to be learned, you're going to have a tough time with modern gaming, because it's just not that way anymore. However, if you're the type of player that likes to play a lot of games, likes to, rent a game or borrow a game from a friend and then beat it in 5 hours and then play the next thing and then just consume, you're living in probably the greatest era of video games ever conceived, because there's always something to play. Every day there's something being released. If it's not an indie, it's some kind of free-to-play game. So you're having a whale of a time. And I think this game was a decade ahead of its time in predicting where the industry was going to go. Because look at what we're doing right now, guys. This is the most interesting plate power, the green one, which, once again, look at the speed of it. Don't you think this would be a little bit faster in a more modern game? Absolutely, right? All we're doing now, guys, is the faster sequences in Sonic Adventure. We're literally watching the game play itself, and every so often we're hitting a plate, and I'm pressing one button once. That's what I'm doing. I'm not playing. I'm letting the game do cool things, and I'm taking credit for it. And it's accessible, and it looks amazing, but it's not gameplay. And this is where games have gone from this point onwards. But this game was there. Now, can you imagine if this game had made it so that you die in one hit, and that you can save anywhere, but when you die, you have to reload the save, so it punishes you for dying, and it teaches you to save as many times as you want, depending on the experience you want to have? Can you imagine if the platforming was a little tighter when it comes to its execution, where when you go towards those rings, you have to press B when the princess hand grabs it? If you press B before he grabs it, you don't swing. If you press B after he grabs it, and he lets go, you fall. Can you imagine if they tightened up these systems, and they made it so that it required you to learn the timing on the platforming? You would have yourself a rather technical game. And the only thing you've done is get rid of that accessibility that the industry is going to be championing 10 years from now. And I think there's an easy way of doing this, because you might be thinking, well, Chris, that doesn't sound very fun to me. I like the game the way it is. I had a great time. I don't want to fall off on every platforming segment. And I understand. Well, guess what? Even if you fall, Elika saves you. Because here's what you do, right? You have these as difficulty options. This game has no difficulty options. Imagine if this game had a normal difficulty, and then imagine if this game had an expert difficulty. And on the expert difficulty, everything's tighter, everything's more demanding, and more difficult. And immediately you have something here that rewards your input, but it's the exact same game, and if you're having a tough time, you can have Elika. You could have the option to turn off Elika's saviour, to turn off her grabbing you when you lose. You could have had all of these features that weren't as ubiquitous as they are now, that could have been applied here. And you can make that just by simply having what difficulty modifiers are meant to do, which is to give an experience for everybody. Give everybody something to sink their teeth into. And there was a game quite recently that did something similar to this, and it might not be the game that you're expecting me to talk about, but there was a game called Tomb Raider that had a reboot, much like this was a reboot of Prince of Persia, and it didn't do so well. That was a reboot of Tomb Raider, and it did pretty damn well. The first game was interesting, people liked it, even if Lara was a bit of a serial killer. The second game is the game I'm talking about, which was building on the franchise and the established framework that they developed, and in that game, there were these challenges you could do, these trials that took place on existing levels, and they had modifiers. And one of those modifiers was like a pro version of platforming, and it meant that when you jumped towards a surface, you had to press a button to grab it. And it was the most weird, old-school, awkward thing in the world. But it was such a clever touch, because it gave player agency over something that had been automatic for a long time. And it made it so that when I first tried to do those challenges, I kept falling off. Because I'd forgotten what to do. It had been so long since a game demanded of me to grab a ledge, because ledge grabbing has been automatic for a long time. And this is kind of... that was it, guys, as well, trying to get him to throw her into the sludge. Did you see that? That was so funny. He's dead anyhow. Oh, no, he's not. That wasn't the death. Or was it? Maybe it was. Oh, yeah, I think the footage messed up. So I have OBS encoding errors sometimes, guys. The intention of my editing on this walkthrough was when I did the cleansing of the corrupted final enemy, I wanted to show him being touched by Elika and turning into light, and you might see it on some of them, but on that particular one, the picture was stuttering at the time, so I removed it. But now we get to do some wonderful platforming here, some Sonic Adventure, on this insane amount of... look at this geometry right now, this crazy bootleg, hobbled together tower of wood and structure on these hot air balloons. Like, really, really cool motif going on here. Kind of reminiscent of Columbia in Bioshock Infinite with all the balloons and the ropes and the jerry-rigging. Like, what a great motif, right? But all I'm doing is running around pressing Y. And there's nothing wrong with that, and there's everything wrong with that. It depends on what part of the divide you land on, doesn't it? And then we go back to the temple, guys, and we get the next power. 2 more powers to go until we can take on the final boss. This area looks so amazing too. The skybox with all the undulating darkness. It's just such a good looking game. But here we go again. New power, new waypoint, and a bit of fast travelling onto a plate, onto some more magic carpet rides, which ironically enough we're actually going to get a magic carpet ride coming up. And that one is my least favourite of the plates, which you'll see why when we do that. But there's more light seeds being populated. We now need 540 light seeds for the next objective. That's a lot of light seeds to pick up. And make sure that you stay on top of that if you want to get to the end of the game, basically. Because unfortunately, they do gate progress like Tingle did in Wind Waker. And I don't know anybody that likes what Tingle did in Wind Waker, because it was one of the most frustrating things in modern gaming at the time. They keep on grabbing the ledges, doing the traversal. But let's talk about some visual language, because I've mentioned that a few times. And there's so much of it in this game that is essentially institutionalized at this point. It's become standardized as well. And once you get it in you, it's really difficult to just not automatically see it and do it. And I think that's awesome design. And if you're curious of what I mean when I say visual language, in this particular definition of it, it's the idea of your eye sees things in the video game and it conveys what you need to do. It's essentially giving you instructions without the need of words and without the instructions itself being, so overt that it's in your face and annoying. It's the true test of just fundamentally amazing game design. And the great thing about it, but also the greatest weakness of it, is because visual language is so indoctrinating, and it's the type of thing that just ingrains so deeply into you and becomes autonomous, that you might not even notice that you're doing it, so that it might go ignored, even though it's so good. And we have some immediately right now. This vine wall that I'm climbing on is a very specific design of vines. They have roses in them to make them pop. You can't mistake those walls. Those walls aren't just willy-nilly spaced around. They are only ever present when you have to climb them. So when you see that bunch of vines with those rose tips, you know that that is a wall that you have to climb. And we're now on a magic carpet ride. And this section here is so funny. So this whole part is anchored back to the center of the screen. So if you let go of the analog, you go back to the middle. So you have to hold directions to move out of the way of the obstacles. And what the obstacles do is, the game gives the impression that you can go to the left, go to the right, go up, go down, and you can get around the threats. But there are certain parts where you can't, and you have to go to a direction. So you'll dodge things your own way, and then you'll try to go up, and the screen won't let you go up, and you'll hit the wall. So be very careful on these Aladdin moments, because if you pick the wrong direction and the game wants you to do the opposite, unless you react quickly, you're going to have to reset. But because this game is balanced the way it's balanced, you don't die. You just get to retry again and Elika saves you. Because this really shouldn't be called Prince of Persia, it should be called Elika Saves You repeatedly. But visual language is so important to games, and especially to tutorializing and contextualizing what's expected of the player. And the stronger that design, the more hidden it is, but the more effective it is too. And one of the great examples I will always give is the very beginning of Mario. In Super Mario, at the start, the game teaches you exactly the distance that your character can jump, and exactly how much distance that is, and how to understand your jump from the start of the game so that you can learn to get better with it and beat the game. So that very first level in Mario Brothers is beautifully elegant game design, teaching you about the jump without teaching you anything, because all you're doing is playing the video game and having a great time. And this is something that has evolved into every stage of visual presentation in video games. And it's one of the reasons why people have such a tough time with tutorials. Because video games have got so good at teaching us things, without us realizing they're teaching us things, that when a game stops every 40 seconds to tell you some bullshit paragraph, and then make you do some arbitrary reenactment of said bullshit paragraph, we get frustrated. We get irritated, we get frustrated, and we wish they'd done it a better way, because without realizing it, several games already have. And this game does have tutorials, and most games will have tutorials, especially at the beginning. I've turned them off now because they got so fucking annoying they kept popping up. And you need that, you do need that, just in case you forget, just to refresh your memory. But fundamentally, the game is doing a lot of things as well that's teaching you stuff that you're reacting to, and you're learning to reacting to it, and you're conditioning yourself to react to it. And the one area of this that I love the most that comes from the old games is when you wall run. So watch the prince as he wall runs, right? You're not going to see it too much from me, because I have a lot of time on Prince of Persia. But you'll notice at the end of his wall running animation, the hand that isn't on the wall is going to do a movement. Do you see it there? It goes from to his side, to the side, to the side of his body, to the side of him, and then he moves his fingers out. There is such an interesting language to this when he's climbing, when he's doing the wall run. When he moves his hand out, he's telling you that you're at the end of his wall run, and he's going to start to fall. So when you see the prince move his arm away from his body, and you see his hand do that motion, it's telling you this is when you jump. And it's not coming up on the screen, and it's not shouting at you, but it's telling you through his action that now's a good time to get off this wall, basically. And you'll notice a lot of my jumps don't even get to that point, because as he's about to do it, I'm jumping off the wall. And the great thing about this design is you don't have to listen. You can ignore it and slide down a little bit and then jump, but it might alter the jump you get and it might end up getting you killed. But fundamentally, it's giving you the choice. It's giving you a piece of information that you can either take or you can leave. And it's doing it all in a great animation, in a fun animation, and you don't even realise it's happening until somebody analyses it like that. There's another quick save as we fight this guy. He goes for the slash, we're going to stun him with Elika, wall carry him and then kill him on the edge. Launch into the juggle, into Elika, into the spike, into the dead. There's the execution. It would have been cool if they could have done more of those animations, because I feel like some of the animations in this game are really superb, and because you do a decent amount of fighting, even if it's not too much, there could have been a handful of different ones that he does. Warrior Within had a ton of different animations like that, so I feel like that's one area of the game that could have been stronger. As we move into this castle walls area here with the yellow plates. And the yellow plates are all the same. You do that awkward flying sequence, and you try not to bang into things. And I feel like this one's such a missed opportunity, this one. This is probably the plate that gives me the most remorse. Because just imagine, right? Imagine if you could attack while you were doing this. And imagine if there was pre-planned positions of enemies waiting, or some kind of obstacle that could be cut. So you're flying around, you're dodging a few things, you're moving to the side. They could have even given you a dash to the side or to the or whatever direction, so you can dash away from things and dodge things. And then you could be cutting. It could be cutting chains. You could be cutting, like, you know, palatial carpets. You could be cutting anything, drapes, curtains, you name it. Some fancy Babylon shit, some lianas or something. You know, there could have been all kinds of moments where you could interact with things and like even hitting a switch to change the path that you're on, like a minecart segment would. They could have added a ton of different details here. You know, making things easier, opening up passages and getting really creative with it. But I feel like this is the kind of plate that exists because they were running out of ideas and they'd said there was going to be 4 of them and they only came up with 2. Barely. Because let's face it, there's only one that's interesting. 2 of them are the fucking same, and one of them is that. And that one could have been really good, but it's way too Earthworm Jim and not enough, you know, Gummy Ship / Lilac Wars. But this is the Kruger slide, and it's one of the faster instances of the Kruger slide as well, as we move into this territory with the Hunter. The Hunter likes to lay traps, and this is one of his traps. And this is another one of those moments where you see the visual language of the game. So you've been playing the game now for a dozen hours, and you're learning that the scratching on the wall means you need to wall run. You're learning that anything that has any kind of recess into it is a place for your hands. You're learning that any kind of pole or any kind of, you know, protruding object is something to stand on. And all of this is teaching your brain the language of the platforming of Prince of Persia. And if you've already played Prince of Persia before, you've had 3 games to teach you all of this. And the area where this game does the same thing, but it mixes it up, is in the moments where Elika's involved. So just then, I knew that was the direction I wanted to go in, but that jump is way too far for my guy. But not when you use Elika, because she helps. And it's so natural too. Like, you'd think I know where I'm going here when I'm playing, but I don't. But that's the testament of how good the game design is, and how good the visual language of their platforming's planning is. It's wonderfully choreographed. And then we have another fight with the Hunter. This is a big combo into a big ender there with Elika, but it didn't do that much damage. And he goes into Corruption, which we parry into Elika, back into throwing him up. Interesting, it didn't get rid of his shield. I wonder if that was a bug, or if it was just too quick for the game to realise he didn't have it. And now he does the anti-Elika tech. Am I going to throw Elika at him? Oh no, we're just going to do some parries. So the parry has a really nice hit stun on it, and then afterwards the enemy will always do a riposte. They will always do a standard attack. So depending on what attack they do, because they've only got one, but each of them is slightly different in perhaps its startup, but fundamentally they're all the same speed. So you're never really in that much danger. You can block in this game by just holding the trigger. I don't know if you can block everything. I don't know if things are unblockable. The parry is so generous, I would rather parry than block. But here's me just going into a bit of a wailing match with him. And this is how you know that getting that full combo out is not going to work every time, because there's no planet where every boss is going to let you do 3 to 4 X's in a row. It just doesn't happen. And this is where I wish the combat was a little bit different. It would be really cool if he guarded and you guarded and there was a lot of defensiveness, but then when you hit them and you get through their guard, you can land a combo. Because I think if you look at something like God Hand, a game that does combat better than most games you'll ever play and that will ever exist, God Hand is a game where when you guard break somebody, they give you just the right amount of time to land any move in the entire game. So the enemy is stunned for the perfect amount of time. When you're new to the game, it feels like they recover really quickly and you don't have time to do anything and you wish it was longer. But once you learn the game and you get better, you realise that they have given you the perfect amount of time to react skillfully and punish the AI. And it's one of those masterful pieces of design that just doesn't really exist anymore. That was pretty scary. That's what happens when you mash the button, guys, and you hit that input buffer too hard. Be very careful with mashing buttons. Or maybe not. Maybe this is one of those rare moments where the input is confusing what I want to do. Oh, we got it then. Maybe it was human error. It could be human error, but there was a moment in this game where I jumped towards a wall 4 times, and instead of wall running, he ran up it and jumped off it. And I was running on an angle, I was hitting it on a perfect angle to do a wall run, and he refused to do it because the detection was really goofy. And it only happened on one wall, and I don't know if we've seen it yet, but it's the worst wall in the game. It really pissed me off. And of course, it was only 4 times, which is not the end of the world, and I didn't die because you bloody can't, but I just didn't want it in the recording, you know? I didn't want me running into a wall like a clown when I wasn't feasibly doing anything wrong. Which I suppose we should talk about Elika when we talk about people doing something wrong. So there's moments in this game which is ahead of its time as well, which is interactions between 2 cooperative partners. So of course you play the whole game with Elika with you, and she is a companion, but she doesn't get in the way, right? That's the design of companions, or it should be. She's with you to give the impression of companionship, but she's not in the way like an unwieldy trolley in a supermarket. However, there are certain moments where she interacts with the prince by climbing on his back, or the prince grabs her hand, and in those moments she affects your animations and your inputs. And I didn't remember this. This was one of the things when it doesn't happen often, but about 4 or 5 times in the recording of this, the prince would do something to make sure that Elika was secure, and he would not listen to what I'm telling him to do. And it doesn't sound like the biggest thing, and it isn't the biggest thing, but in a game that is so good and that has aged really well, all considered, this is one of those glaring moments of a stylistic choice negatively affecting mechanics. And speak about mechanics, these segments really made my OBS shit the bed. And to give you an idea, ladies and gentlemen, I'm using a 3080, and I have an i7 10700K. So my PC is by no means a slouch. You know, my RAM's like 3200 megahertz. It's Kingston, Corsair Kingston, I think it is. You know, my machine can handle many things, but OBS, when it wants to shit the bed, it wants to shit the bed. Because I had my taskbar open, my task manager, to see what this game was doing. My GPU was on like 9%. My CPU was on like 40% when I was recording. And I'm recording at a pretty high setting. But every so often, OBS just doesn't like it and has these problems. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. And this was one of the areas where it was consistently doing this. So I'm very sorry that this looks choppy. Thankfully, of all the parts of the game to look choppy, this is the one part I'm okay with. Because there's no skill here, there's no point here. Like, I was tempted to completely just remove those sequences because they're so brain dead. And I love the idea of them. I love the Woo Nelly segments in Earthworm Jim. But those segments have you collecting things. Can you imagine if you could pick up stuff in those moments? And I'm not asking for them to be, you know, all the light seeds, because it's light seeds up the arse in this game. But if this game had some kind of resource or currency to buy moves or upgrades, can you imagine if you could be picking them up while you're flying around? Or maybe you could be picking up magic power so that you could power up Elika and she could fire a fireball and there could be flying threats. There's so many things they could have done in those sequences, and instead, it's just a magic carpet ride, and you don't even have Robin Williams making slightly inappropriate jokes, you know? But here we go fighting the Hunter again. The Hunter now is going to be using his new gimmick, which is breaking the floor. And we're going to be just going to town on him with really long combos and big old chunks on his life bar. Do you see how much life bar it's showing right now that he's been removed? This game does have that, but it doesn't have that slow decay as it trickles down to where it is now. If it had that and it was red, oh, it would be so good. Stylistic differences, you know, it is a personal choice, but that's the stuff that definitely gets me off. But look at the particulates that's going on here. There's so many really nice attention to detail in this game. And it's one of the reasons why I have such a conflicted time mocking Ubisoft. Like, mocking Ubisoft now is the easiest thing in the world because they've literally made the same game for the last 10 years. The only difference is they've changed where the camera's positioned. That's it. That's all it fucking is, dude. The UI is the same. The design's the same. What you do in the game's the same. They've made everything they do in every game you play and every game they make the same. And all that does is give you inherited fatigue. So now when you play a Ubisoft game, it's like you've already put 200 hours into it because you probably bloody have. And it's so frustrating to say that because Ubisoft made this. You know, back in the day, Ubisoft made really creative, really risky, really interesting games. And now they just want to be pumping out this annualized garbage. And it just winds me up so much. And the sad part is, here we go, this is what it was supposed to do on the other guy. So Elika cleanses the corrupted, and it does this big light effect, and then it's going to transition into the next fast travel. And if you like Far Cry, that's awesome, guys. You know, Far Cry's whatever Far Cry is. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. I think Far Cry 1, 2, and 3 were really good, and I think everything else shouldn't exist. You know, except for maybe Blood Dragon. Blood Dragon was hilarious and great, but it was also an add-on. And same with Assassin's Creed. If Assassin's Creed had stopped at 2, I would be absolutely okay with that. You know? And what Assassin's Creed is now shouldn't have been called Assassin's Creed. It should have been called something else. If they'd have called it something else, I don't think people would be so harsh with those new games, because those new games look absolutely fine. The problem is, you're calling them Assassin's Creed, you don't fucking do anything from Assassin's Creed. You know, there's no climbing anymore, they got rid of the bloody climbing. You don't spend 9 years parkouring up towers and running around like a lunatic, you're not sitting on benches, you're not following people and eavesdropping, you're not killing people with your hidden blade and like killing bloody vicars and bishops and shit. Like, it's got nothing to do with anything anymore, it's its own thing. That game is more to do with leveling up, finding gear and sailing than it is to do with anything that made the pillars of Assassin's Creed. So to put your name on it, all you're doing there is exploiting your audience and getting them to buy a familiar franchise, and I think it's bullshit. Because if they'd have just called that fucking game, like, I don't know, Man with Sword and Boat, who does side quests for questionable loot. Not a catchy name, I'll admit, but you know what I mean? They could have called it anything. They could have literally called the first game Origin. They could have just called it Origin. That game's called Origin. I don't know what that is. That sounds exotic. It could be cool. Oh my god, it's set in Egypt. Oh my god, look at the graphics. Oh my god, I'm on a horse. You know, it's not a hard thing to do. And then the next thing could have been Odyssey, and then the next thing could have been Valhalla. These are cool fucking names of games that are cool and have nothing to do with Assassin's Creed. Don't shoehorn Assassin's Creed in just because you want to sell more copies. All you're doing is hurting the people that like Assassin's Creed. And the people who like Assassin's Creed now don't like Assassin's Creed, because Assassin's Creed isn't Assassin's Creed anymore. Oh, by the way, I went the wrong way here, so instead of trimming it out and making a confusing jump, I decided to show you myself backtracking. I'm not infallible, guys. I do make mistakes. It happens a lot. But let's continue moving on. And just look at this cool-looking cavern here, with all the nice touches and the nice details. Gosh, I hope Prince of Persia comes back, guys. I really do. I miss this franchise. It reminds me of being a lot younger and a lot less pessimistic. So we should probably talk about that Prince of Persia remake thing. Because I don't know if you saw it, but they showed some footage. It was meant to be out by now, because it's the start of 2021. I'm really glad it's not out right now, because the footage they showed looked rough as hell. It looked really bad. There was a scene where there was 4 dudes that all had the same face. It looked like the most lazy garbage ever. Did you see that, by the way? That disappearing enemy? That guy hit me. I saved on the platform before I fought him. I reloaded. I was all the way back. I platformed back and he'd vanished. So if you're wondering how I got that enemy to disappear, it's called tank his blade with your face, Alt F4, spam Alt Tab for 20 minutes to get back in the game, and then he doesn't spawn. And then we come here into this wonderful Arabian Night, and one of the more difficult puzzles in the game, which is turning valves to open floodgates or sluice gates so that you can fill this area and use a pad. And I'm not gonna front here, ladies and gentlemen. I don't like this puzzle. It can be done quite quickly, and I've kept in a decent amount of steps here, but I was really tempted to just completely trim this out because I was annoyed as fuck the first time I did it. The first puzzle went down really quickly. The second puzzle took forever because I was brain farting on the final part of it like a moron. It was my fault. And then when I did it, the game crashed. So I had to do it again, and I wasn't in a really good mood. But the idea here is that the best way to do it, I think, from my limited patience with puzzles, is if you can line up the first part, and you can line up the final part, the middle parts will only have a few rotation to sync up to work, and then you'll get it. And what happens is, you usually have to move them quite far out of sequence to get the right sequence. So if you feel like you're doing it wrong, you're probably doing it right, and you're one turn away from victory. That was the feeling that I got here. And again, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to Google the exact amount of turns, feel free to do that. You know, this is not my expertise as a guide maker. I don't enjoy puzzles. And I used to enjoy them a lot more, but this one pissed me off. Not this one, the one on the other side. And the other thing that's really annoying here that you might not know, which I've mentioned earlier, but this is one of the areas where it really bit me, is when you turn these mechanisms, sometimes when you hold like 1 o'clock on the clock face, they push it one way. Sometimes they push it the other way. And the amount of times I pushed things in the wrong way and had to do like loops to get back to where I started was off the fucking chart. So if you're watching this and you're laughing your ass off, I'm glad because you can get some enjoyment from it. But just know, I was having a horrible time turning these things. And in the game's defense, once you get used to how the stuff works, it's fine, you know. You get a feel for these things the more you play the game. I jumped onto this game, immediately started recording, made this project and had a blast. But these moments definitely were not for me. But what I would recommend here is line up the final bit so that it's facing into the off-spill that you need to pour the stuff into. Line up the start, and then the middle will just find itself. But if you watch this, I think this is quite a quick one for me. Because I knew that bottom left-hand side had to all be straight. I knew they all had to be straight, and at the end it had to peek into the spill tray. So I was just focusing on that. But I was really, really, really tilted. Supremely tilted. And I was already tilted with this game because of the port and the stupid thing I had to do to load after resets. And luckily... Oh, by the way, if you jump in that, this happens. This is Elika saving you, by the way. I kept this one in because I didn't want to confuse the puzzle. And you could be pedantic and argue that that's damage. But you know how easy that would be to just cut that out and then make a crossfade and say that, you know, I fell in the thing? This is the thing when it comes to making a walkthrough. I try to be as honest and transparent as I can, but I'm not going to go out of my way to be pedantic just to please that 1% artiste, because there's no reason to. I didn't take a hit from an enemy, so to me, it still counts, and I'm okay with it. But every time I've told you guys that when you try to die, Elika saves you, that's what happens. You see that animation every single time. You're falling, your hand goes up, she clutches your hands, and she saves you, and she respawns you. And it's just how the game works. But there goes the puzzle. Easily, in my opinion, the one that took me the longest the first time. And then, of course, I got the crash, and then I got it quite quickly the second time. But the first time I was doing it, it took like 10 minutes. I was really, really not in the mood. And I think that's one of the big problems, isn't it? You know, and then I immediately saved just then. You heard the bell. I saved just in case it crashes. Because the one big problem about any kind of project like this is if the game has a history of instability on the version that you're playing, you can do the most difficult thing that takes you the longest, and then you can lose it all in the flick of an eye. So you've got to be so careful. And I don't want that. But here we go, flying into the next encounter, which is going to be against the Concubine, I believe. There's me saving before the fight so that we can respawn on the platform, but I don't think I needed this one because I don't think I reset. But here she comes, and she captures Elika, and we get to fight her. But take note, not only is the Concubine immune to being ring-outed, seemingly, but this corruption is going to give her the advantage on the edge. And this is where the combat gets a little bit frustrating once you know what you're doing. Oh, we need Elika now, so I'm going to try and back scoop my way to get her unlocked. Here we go, she's getting up. And we should be fine. Parry into Elika, into combo. I wonder if you can ring her out, if there's some tricky way to do it. I would imagine a speedrunner's probably found a way to do it. But then again, I would imagine a speedrunner's probably found a way to skip the trigger and never fight this woman once. Oh, here we go, throwing her up, joining her. Hey, look at this one. Boom. I don't know if we've seen that one before, but that's a cool one. Nearly half her HP as well. This is the thing where she'll throw her if you're careful. I don't think I'm going to mess about throwing Elika this time. I think I'm just going to stun her. Oh no, there it was, yeah. I always see, just to see what they do. Then she knocks me away. Like a beast. It is interesting though, finding out what you can get away with and finding out what you can't get away with. I like that too. I like the dynamic nature of interacting with the environments. I wish there was more of it. I feel like they had a really cool idea of getting the bosses towards these walls and being able to do huge damage to them or getting reversed, but I feel like they missed out on designing combat around that moment. It could have turned into a completely different balance and different game. It could have been really interesting, but they just decided to go a different way and just have these canned animations that keep playing. And they wouldn't be too bad if it wasn't so easy to corner carry. But if you corner carry, like look how much distance we just moved. We went from the complete edge of the platform to the middle. I carried her half the entire arena on one combo. And it's not like I was trying to do the best corner carry combo. I'm just trying to do different combos and have fun with the combat, you know. And there goes another boss. But they were so close to getting something super interesting, and I think they just whiffed a bit. And that would have been really nice to see more of this game, to see a sequel to this game, to see where this version of the trilogy would have gone. Because I think this game didn't get the light of day it deserved. I think it came out at a bad time as well. It came out at a time where Prince of Persia had kind of been forgotten, and where Assassin's Creed, everybody was hungry for Assassin's Creed now. Prince of Persia wasn't cutting it, you know. I suppose we're lucky that we got this. And I haven't looked into the story of the development, and I haven't looked into the true reception and all the feeling and everything, but from the bit of Googling I did for the review scores and some of the reviews that I saw, it just seemed to be a lot of people saying like the Prince of Persia that missed. And that was definitely the impression I got at the time, but I thought it was great. Even then, I thought it was great, you know, because to me, Prince of Persia is the platforming. Prince of Persia is the light battling every so often. It's the dynamic between the male and the female leads. It's the sense of atmosphere and journey. It's the sense of wonder and adventure. And I think that this game, it nails a lot of it, you know. It doesn't do it to the peak of what like Sands of Time did. Sands of Time is such a classic. It redefined what Prince of Persia was. Because Prince of Persia before that was a two-dimensional platforming game on a console most people don't even know of. You know, on a console most people don't remember because they weren't bloody born. So Prince of Persia back then, completely different thing. You know, it's more akin to something like Pitfall, if you remember that. That was a bit more of a modern platformer, but even then, you know, ancient compared to what we've got now. This is interesting too as well. This was one of the areas where one of those pillars where it auto resets where the prince goes to so you can jump immediately off them. It reset me to the wrong position and I jumped into the wrong wall and I died. So that wasn't cool. But here he comes. Covers himself in black magic. See if we can knock him towards the edge and execute him. Interesting, he got an attack through. That was a block as well. That was not a parry. That's what's handy though about the damage in this game. When you take damage, all four corners of the screen go bloody. So it's really obvious to see. Even the prince's stance changes because he gets all wounded. And technically, you can only take 2 hits in this game. You take 1 hit to go into wounded, and then the second time you get hit, it goes into an animation where they have to kill you, and they do a quick time event, and if you do the quick time event, you live, and if you don't, you die. But then Elika brings you back, and nothing's changed, and nothing's lost, and there's no stakes, and then it just kind of ruins the risk. There's no risk and reward in this game. Like, I would have loved it to get a DLC difficulty. This game would have benefited so much from a DLC difficulty. Like, one of the things that they never really capitalized on was having more than one enemy attacking you at once. And I know why they did that. They did that because the movement speed and the lock-on system is very much rigid in these 1v1s, these duels that you do, these fencing moments. But I would have preferred the combat if you could engage the lock-on and then disengage it, so you could do a bit of movement, you could do a bit of running around, and then when you wanted to attack, you could go into like holding a trigger, and it would put you in that lock-on stance. And I think that would have remedied the whole situation, because look at my movement right now. The movement in this game is fine. You know, the prince doesn't even have a sprint. He just kind of jogs around, he's got a jump. You can cancel falling animations by jumping. You know, it's got a decent amount of tech. You could have even given him a roll. You know, press B and he rolls, and maybe it's got a few iframes or something. You know, you could have easily added some complexity and added some design if you wanted to, but it's just not what they were going for. And it would have been interesting to see what that could have been like. And they could have maybe had one of the corrupted be two things. Like, Concubine could have been Gemini. She could have been, you know, two. It could have been like a harem. Two concubines. You know, one of them could have been holding a jug of wine. The other one could have been feeding you grapes. It could have been delightful. And it's just an easy twist, isn't it? And then you've got this thing. You could have had one of them trying to hypnotize you. One of them trying to be bait while the other one sneak attacks you. It could have been like the creature on top of Bale's head in Devil May Cry, you know, and they're both those like tiny squid girls with the weird hair. It could have been like those chicks. You know, this is literally me spitballing on a commentary that's going to take 3.5 hours. You know, it's not like I've sat down with a pad and pencil and come up with ideas. It's the stuff that writes itself, isn't it? You could have easily added to this formula because it's such a good, strong foundation. And the sequels would have probably done that. Because if you think about Prince of Persia, Sands of Time was a very linear, scripted narrative about the prince trying to win back his kingdom from the Maharaja. Because the Maharaja had found the dagger. It's been a long time since I played these games, guys. It's been even longer since I played them for story, but like he finds the Sands of Time, doesn't he? And he gets the dagger or whatever. And then you're trying to stop him and bring back the flow of time, because I think he might freeze time or something. It'd be interesting to find out when I go back to them. But first game, you're stopping the Maharaja, you've got the girl with you, the princess, they don't like each other, they spend the whole game kind of being catty with each other, and then they learn to, you know, they form a bond, they form a kinship through that adventure, and it turns into a really nice character arc for them. A predictable character arc, but a character arc nonetheless. And then the second game goes batshit crazy. They ditch the voice actor, they ditch the happy tempo and the happy tone, they go full emo, full Godsmack, and you've got Robin Atkin Downes shouting at everybody, trying to get revenge and trying to make things right. And then, of course, he's getting chased by an eldritch abomination that wants to set the timeline correctly because he's an anomaly. And then that whole game is, you know, violent, dismemberment, none of the cutesiness, it's all emo as fuck, it's Tobey Maguire in the Spider-Man movie when he's venomed up. And then at the end of that, you know, you've got asses, you've got big boobs, you've got metal music, and you've got all kinds of anti-establishment, fuck the police, fuck the parents and everything. And I really, really liked it. I thought it was a really fun game with a good story and a good, like, just really cool moments that you can see coming if you're smart enough, but will probably catch you off guard when you're not paying attention. And then the third game was kind of the repercussions of everything that you'd done up to that point, and it was a bit more of a hybrid, wasn't it? More of a hybrid of Warrior Within and Sans. So you had the more jovial prince a little bit, you had the less angsty prince and angry prince, and you had a more accepting and more charismatic one. You had the relationships, you know, you had the chariot racing, which was an odd addition. You had the mixes to the combat, you had coming home, sailing home to Babylon or wherever it was, and you know, you had the emphasis on stealth. That game has got a lot of stealth kills that you can do, and it takes some of the features that were built in that game and then they make it into this game. So in the combat on this game, when you attack and the game does that freeze to tell you, yo dude, press a button, well, in Two Thrones, when you go to execute a person, he draws the knife back and the game pauses and the dagger glows to tell you, yo dude, press a button. And it's just the evolution of these mechanics and these formations that they've come up with that are really, really cool, and it's the logical extension of them. And those games were tonally all over the place, but consistently good with the platforming, consistently evolving and changing and trying new things with the combat, and they always had a story driving them that was really, really fun. And of course the hook of Two Thrones was every so often you would lose yourself to the darkness or to the timeline or to the seeds of the Dahaka or whatever it is that that still haunts you, and you turn into this crazy demon devil form of yourself that had this really cool chain thing. And then you would do a bunch of platforming, and then you'd go back to normal. And that was the hooks of those games. They tried a bunch of hooks, they all worked really well. I played the living shit out of them, and I love those games. And then this game is trying to do some of those things, but taking it in this different direction, inspired by some of the more contemporary games at the time, and this is what we got. And it'd be really interesting to see the comments on this one, because how do you feel, guys? How do you feel about this one? Did it ruin it for you? Did you like the charm of it? Did you like the tone? Did you like that it was a bit different? Do you like that they tried a risk? Ubisoft doing something risky. And I know you're probably thinking, Chris, it's a fucking remake, how is that risky? And you're not wrong. Ooh, that's new, right there. When he fires that purple haze at you, it reverses your movement controls. But because the movement in this game is so sluggish, and it's not in any way that technical, unless you're a crazy speedrunner, that it doesn't make a difference, because you never have to use movement in an intuitive fashion to stay alive, because the dodge exists, and the block exists, and the parry is really, really, really easy to do, and really strong. So, we just whooped on Elika's dad again. I don't really know why he's there. I wish he would have definitely got a bit more development and a bit more of an evolution. He could have been a much better fight, but he falls from the same thing everybody else does. Every enemy attacks the moment that they move. So as long as you watch the enemy, the moment he moves, he twitches, block. Every time. And you'll never fail. And it might make you think, Chris, if this is the case and you knew this almost immediately coming back to the game, why make a no damage run of it? And the first reason is I want to put something on the channel, because last year I definitely took it easier on YouTube. YouTube was not my focus, because my days on YouTube have never really been my best days, I could say, because my channel is just not one of those channels that resonates with a lot of people. But at the same time, I don't want to give up on that stuff, because I really, really like doing this. This to me this is where I started, this is what I'm passionate about, and it's something that I've done for a decade, and I still want to do it, and I still get excited to do it. So keeping that spark alive, even if it's just a small one, is very important to me. This is interesting too. So every so often you trigger these dialogues, and I'm trimming them out, and it's a shame, because they're really nice dialogues. They build the world. They're not delivered in the best way, because they freeze you and it's mandatory and you can't skip them. But they are cool, and in that particular one, when you start that dialogue, the corruption is around you and the screen is black and white to tell you that you're in corruption. But then midway through that conversation, they bring the colour back to the screen, even though technically you're still in the corruption. And it was one of those weird moments that I noticed. But you'll also see here, guys, as we go and finish off the concubine here and keep stalking and hunting her, we've also just used the blue plate, and the blue plate is identical in many ways to the red plate. It's just a plate that bounces you to another plate. It's like the same plate as the other plate, and it makes you wonder, why does it even exist? And this is one of the really weaker areas of this game. The plates are just kind of an afterthought and an ambitious idea that took no developing and really didn't go anywhere. But why make this video when it doesn't need it? The second reason is because I love the game. I really do like this game. It's not the best game in the world, it's got some flaws, but it's a very charming game, and I really appreciated what it was doing. I think the narrative, I think the way they tell the story, and the way that they build the relationship with you and Elika, and just the interactions between the prince and her while you play, this to me it's so next level in a lot of storytelling. It's the type of thing that Uncharted went and ran with and made so much fun and so dynamic. It's what a lot of games are doing now, and this game was doing it at a decent time back, you know? And a lot of games at this time were doing this, were starting to do this and trying to build on these features, and it's something that's gone on to be pretty much too much the other way. Like, you know, when you look at something like Red Dead Redemption 2, where all of the cinematic touches just completely destroy how that game plays and destroy how that game feels, and makes that game feel like a draconian piece of dog shit that you don't want to play. Well, the only reason half of that stuff exists is because of games like this, is because of these moments, these human touches, these wonderful flushes that this game is showcasing at a time when it wasn't as common as it is now. And I don't like games to go whole in on those like holistic moments, because it gets in the way of the mechanics. But I do think that there's a good balance, and I think you can see a balance in something like Max Payne 3. That was another moment where I ran into one of those monsters and got saved by Elika and trimmed it a little bit. But you can see those cinematic moments affecting mechanics in a lot of modern games, and some games go way overboard with it, and I really don't particularly enjoy it. But it's just the industry, isn't it? It's the thing that gets people engaged. It's the thing that makes people feel immersed, and immersion is king right now. Immersion is the thing that's driving everything, because 80% of the people that play the games, that buy the games, are the ones seeking immersion, and the ones that don't even beat the game. They're the ones that don't elevate their gameplay or look further into it, because they just don't play it on that level. They play it on a more casual level, and they might play games once a week with their children, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And that's what sells, But additionally, I covered this game because Prince of Persia is expected soon, and this is one of those games to kind of be a nice little appetizer for when the Sands of Time remake comes out. And I've not played Sands of Time since it came out. It's been a long time since I've touched that game, and I remember that game being kind of difficult. I remember using the jumping over enemies and the wall attack a lot in that game to succeed, and I'm looking forward to going back in with my new brain, with my more mature brain, my more experienced brain, and really delving into the combat to see how it works, because at the time I played that Prince of Persia, I was not in the mood to block things. I was not a blocking player. So blocking would have never occurred to me. Well, that was a cool one, but we got interrupted by the stupid side animation because we're fighting on a Horus here. A Horus? Why did I say Horus when I meant Taurus? A big donut. Horus is cool though, isn't he? If Horus was in this game, that would be pretty sick. But look at her parrying the shit out of me here. This is a straight up Sekiro battle right now. Couldn't get a single attack in, and just then, guys, it's kind of interesting because unless you attack with Elika in that moment, which she couldn't do because she had that effect on her which would have cast her away. Oh, that was a good one. Half HP, a bunch of juggles, and then ending it with the ground spike from the throw move. There she goes, confusing my controls. But it's really interesting that the bosses, if they want to, can parry you so consistently. Like, if they want to, they will parry the living shit out of you. And there's times when they set it up in such a way, I don't know what you're supposed to do, other than just take it. Like, I don't know if there's a way to, guaranteed hit them. Because you might be able to try pressing B or try pressing A, and there might have been times where I tried to do that, and maybe it didn't work, or maybe it did and I forgot. But fundamentally, like, I kind of like these battles. I think it'd be really interesting if when they parry you, you can't immediately stop them with a parry and then get your attack. It'd be cool if you had to parry maybe 2 times to get back in the game. And you could guess and you could kind of understand how that trade-off is going to work. So, if they parry you once, they're going to get 2 attacks before you can interrupt them and get your attack. And you can kind of see with what they do how you have to respond, and you could learn that routine and learn those reactions, and it could constantly be changing to keep it all nice and interesting. Like, the bosses really could have done with multi-hitting moves. Like a nice multi-hitting move where you don't flinch them when they attack you, where they can just armor through it and you just do a bunch of parries in a row, would have been really nice, because the animation telegraphing in this game is really good, and the speed of the moves is not deceptive at all. It's all very fair, it's all very honest. You would have been able to do a lot of really cool looking parries, but they didn't want that. They weren't going for that, They were going for parries to be very effective and very cinematic. So when you land that move, look at that effect. There's that time stop, there's that big flash, there's that... Your sword even glows as well. And there we've got this dude. See, that's what I could have done potentially against the concubine. I could have parried her and then just grabbed her and chucked her and then comboed her in the air, probably. But my issue when I'm playing this is I'm trying to do all different combos all the time. And by trying to press different buttons, I notice when I watch this back that I'm doing lots of the same combos anyway. So to look at this, you wouldn't think that I'm trying to do, different combinations of buttons, but it's a testament to how many of them have very similar startups and how many of them are easy to fuck up and get into a situation where you can't get the different move. Because there are some combos that need a starter to have a certain ender, and if you don't do the right starter, the buttons don't work. And if you ever see me look at that, that was not a good one. Can I fix this? That was good. That was very lucky. The game really let me have that, which is nice. That's great game design. You'll also notice that in this sequence I'm being chased by these locust flock or crazy pack of cicadas or something. The concubine has sent an environmental hazard after me. And you might have noticed on one of the previous Corrupted, they had those crazy blobs on the wall that eat you. Well, this is a swarm of something that is going to put pressure on you as you platform. It's meant to be another one of those agitating factors to make you second guess what you're doing and make you make mistakes. But with many things in this game, it doesn't really put the right amount of pressure on you as an agitator, and you do not have to rush at all. You can take your time, you can be precise, you can do what you need to do when you need to do it, and all it's going to do is cinematically follow you and be quite the obedient little gaggle of cinematic flies, which is nice, I guess. But here's the blue plate. I've already mentioned that the blue plate is essentially the red plate, but it's a different animation of hopping between two spaces. And then there's this segment here with this rather obvious cut, as I fucked this part up, as you can imagine. So that segment there, the characters make a bit of a fuss about, oh, we've got to time this jump correctly. You don't have to time that jump at all. There's no timing on that jump, guys. When that thing folds out and you can see it, any timing after that's fine. Like, I thought that was going to be really precise and I had to jump the frame it was popping out or I'd miss it. And I jumped too early and I missed it. Because I'm stupid like that. Because I thought that this game was going to require something of me. And then you realise that you have an eternity to hit that platform. So the only agitator and insistence on rushing is the character's dialogue telling you that you've got to time this. When in reality, Stevie Wonder could fucking time that. But another one of these cranks that takes us all the way to the top, another transition, and then we get to fight another enemy here. Which, lo and behold, is the Concubine again. And I might have previously said in the commentary that it was the last time we were fighting her, because I do that sometimes, I have those wonderful brain farts, but here we are again, taking on the Temptress. I do think her lower half is so interesting and unique, and I do like the pink highlights that she has. She's the boss when I was playing this game the first time. She's the one that stood out to me as being the frustrating one, and I think it's because you can't ring her out. And then the other one that was frustrating was the warrior, because you can't conventionally fight him in a normal sense. And I get what they were trying to do with these two bosses, to add some diversity, add some complexity, from the standard just wail on them a whole bunch. I mean, this one, you can wail on her a whole bunch. The warrior, though, I don't know if you can beat him in conventional combat. I'm trying to jump over her here, and I don't want to do too much because I don't want to push her into the boundary. Ooh, there was the... Interesting. Ah, I think I messed it up. There was something else I could have done there, guys. Did you see how elaborate that combo was? We did a relaunch as well. And it's cool to see that I'm actually getting to land some of those bigger things. So that was quite an exciting one. But there was an ender there that I could have done, and I think I went with Elika when I should have gone with maybe the Prince or maybe the Spike, which would have made it slightly different. But the huge chunk on her life. See you later. This line here coming up too. Oh, is that not the final one? Oh, damn, there's even more. She continues. So when you fight the Concubine the final time, she says this thing, and I thought the line was amazing. It's one of those lines that just sticks with you, where she's trying to beg for her life, and she puts her hand up, and she says, I had no choice. And then Elika, without skipping a beat, like an absolute sadistic motherfucker, and I love it, she goes, I have no choice. And it's cut in such a way, the direction on it, that it's sublime, and you're gonna see it at the end of this. And it was one of those moments where the dialogue in this game so far has been pretty progressive, pretty witty. It's had a really nice humanity to it, and this is where games started to get really, really good voice acting in this part onwards. You know, voice acting in games used to be something else. Like, go back and watch those House of the Dead arcade games. The voice acting in those, it makes you wonder if it was even done by a human, because it's just madness, and it's hilarious, and it's really funny to watch, but it's terrible. It's a complete fucking joke that somebody got paid to do that, and I hope that they didn't, because they're terrible. But then you look at something like this, where it's becoming so natural and so real and so engaging that, you know, these narratives are becoming their own stories, and they're becoming just as gripping as any play or television or book in some ways. But the delivery on that part, so good, you know. Everything up to that point has been solid, and I like it, and I can get behind it, and it's made me laugh a few times, and, you know, it's made me think a few times, but that's the line where you just, oh my goodness. It's such a cutthroat line, and it just goes to show how dedicated Elika is as her character to get this done, to focus on this journey. And if you know the story of this game, you understand why, you know, because there's some information that the prince doesn't have right now, and he just thinks that this is all fun and games because he's kind of a cavalier guy, he's pretty Machiavellian. But there's more stakes here than you realise, but unfortunately they're all narrative stakes, and the gameplay is stakeless. It is a vegan surprise to a meat eater, and it is very unwanted. But here is the concubine again. More cutting of the fake, faux concubines, while she mocks you and starts giving us a little bit of exposition. It is interesting, though. I wonder what they were thinking with this particular sequence. Because later on, they do something that I think is really clever, and it's one of my favourite parts of the game. And it works really well, too. But here we go. Back into the juggle combos, back into the wall pressure, back into the canned animation where you get like a little bit of damage when you should get a lot. Like there should be wall-specific combos. It would be so cool if you could do wall combo strings, and the wall did extra damage. So you see it completely cancel out my combo because of the wall detection. This is where bounding becomes a bad thing. And because this is a fight where you can't kill her, because you can only do so much damage and then she runs away, luckily, it didn't interrupt us in an important moment, but if you're trying to do this game and do one-hit combos on all the bosses and do like a perfect combo to kill them all in one juggle, can you imagine how frustrating that's going to be when you accidentally carry them to the wall? I would wager that it would be harder to avoid the wall than it would be to script those combos to kill the bosses in a really, really effective way. Because they just cover too much bloody distance a lot of the times, and the arenas that they fight you in are designed in such a way that pushing the opponent into the wall is meant to help them recover. They've intentionally made these rooms to let the bosses get a get out of jail free card. And these pillars here, these two pillars, you can use these to take a nice chunk out of your opponent, but I don't think that they went heavy enough in that. I think they could have gone really interesting with what they did with that. But like, do you see that wall interaction? It did less damage than one square. Like that one square there did more damage than that wall interaction. And it's one of the areas of the balance. You'll notice at the start of this guide, if you've watched for so long, I said at the start of this guide that it's too balanced. And in many ways it is. The game is absolutely too balanced. There's no fear of death, there's no punishment for death, and everything respects you way too much. You never have that moment where you go, oh my god, that was cheap. Nothing cheap attacks you when you can't do anything. This is not one of those playthroughs of DSP where he goes, oh my god, dude, I was blocking. Because if you block in this game, you're fine, you know, you'll be okay. Outside of maybe the final fight against the warrior. You know, fundamentally, the game works too well for you to blame it outside of certain platforming, you know, fundamentals that have changed over time. So, the game just respects you far too much. And you'll know from any kind of competitive multiplayer, if an enemy respects you too much, you can just run rampant on them and destroy them because they're not doing what they should be doing to stop you from getting momentum. This is it, by the way. So the concubine essentially covers the platform in fake Elikas, and you have to find the real one. And if you attack them, they just multiply, and you never find the real one. So the puzzle there is to throw yourself off the building and she'll catch you, which is a wonderful puzzle. It's one of the most simplistic, character building, and like conceptually accurate things I've ever seen. I love that puzzle. Because it's not that obvious, even though it kind of is, and it's not difficult, and it's not complicated, but it's so this game. It makes complete sense in the sense of the game's world and its established rules. It's such a good touch. I love that puzzle. It's a stroke of genius, I think. And then Elika calls you a lunatic because she didn't know if she'd be able to save you, but she did. And it goes to show as well, not only is it a great puzzle and is it conceptually accurate, but it's showing the level of their relationship and how it's improved through the story. And you haven't got really a good sense of that because I've been trimming it all out. And this is it. That right there is so cutthroat and awesome. I love that. That is a really good moment. And I had to keep that one in because it's pretty damn amazing. But the tower starts to crumble in the cliched fashion, why would it not crumble? It's only been here for a millennium. Several millennias. It's been absolutely fine. The moment we touch it, everything falls down. And then we get to do some more magic carpet rides around an area that looks awesome. But I can't help but feel like wasn't used very well, as it casts us back into the central part of this tower. But Prince of Persia's always had a good sense of geography, a good sense of geometry, and a good sense of scale. That right there is another one of those fast travels. We're now going to be progressing onwards to sealing away the warrior, who is the final of the 4 corrupted, and then we can finally get vengeance on good old Ahriman and seal him away. But before we do that, we've got to do some more wall running. You'll notice those vines right there don't have the different tint to them, the blue tint with the dark red flowers. I think that's the difference between the corruption and the normal healthy vines. So when you cleanse an area, that's why the graphic changes. But the visual language remains the same. And the waypoint in this, can we talk about the waypoint in this? So waypoints are something that are a bit of a point of contention, especially now in modern games, because games are so accessible. If you don't have a good waypoint, you get frustrated because you're not used to finding your way anymore. In old games, you always had to find your own way, so you got lost all the time, and it just became second nature to wander around and potter into every corner until you triggered some kind of scripting. In this game, you press one button, Elika releases that like spectral light. The light will show you where you need to go, and all you do is follow it. And I think it's a very tonally accurate and really well designed waypoint. And admittedly, because of the world, this world links together so that you can traverse it from any side, and it all gets to the same place, and there's generally about 2 paths to certain places. One path to get there from one angle, one path to get there from another angle, and it all links together in a pretty damn decent cohesive world. And other than moments where you end up going back on yourself because the waypoint confuses the backtracking path with the way forward, and that only happens maybe once or twice, and it did to me, and maybe it was my misdirection that was the reason that it happened. Outside of those instances, the waypoint's been absolutely amazing. It's told me exactly where I need to go at any moment with one press of a button. It doesn't pause the game, it doesn't freeze my character. It does a little bit of panoramic camera movement to help you out, but it's just such a clever and useful tool. And the favourite part of the design from me personally is the fact that you don't have to use it. This is not the game forcing you to use it. This is the game saying, if you want to know where to go, and you can't quite see where our level design's telling you to go, press a button and have your answer. And you still have to do it. It's not like it steals away the sense of discovery because you're still climbing around and seeing what's around the next corner. It's just pointing you in the right way. And that, to me, is a perfect waypoint. It's up there with Dead Space, even though Dead Space limits your mobility a little bit, but still is very, very good as well. Because it gives you the opportunity, if you want, to always know where you're going. And there's a lot of games that seem to revel in leaving you lost when you shouldn't have to be, because there's something they want you to do, or there's something that they want you to discover by accident. And sometimes that can be nice every so often, but when a game does it and it becomes frustrating, is there anything worse in video games than really wanting to see the next part of a game and not being able to because you don't know where to go? It's one of those interesting questions, isn't it? Because I think the older that you are, and the more you've played games, the more you've come across this barrier. And from where I'm standing, they should make it a choice. I think there's a place for games that don't force you in the right direction the whole time, like an obnoxious Guardian. And I think there's a place for games that let you discover and fail and get lost on your own. I think there's space for both of them, and I think the best combination is to have a game that wants you to find where you're supposed to go, but when you don't know where to go, you have an option to press something, and it will tell you, or give you a clue, or give you a direction to follow. That, to me, is what all games should aspire to. The problem with that idea is the waypoint has to be good. And if your waypoint is bad, it doesn't matter how well designed your world is, it doesn't matter how well designed anything is. If your waypoint is drunk, like the crow from Darksiders 2, and sending you in the wrong fucking direction at almost every moment, you're going to have a terrible time. And it's just one of those things, isn't it? The amount of genius that goes into a functioning and effective and useful but not obtrusive waypoint is absolutely underrated. This is interesting too. It locked me in this dialogue in this really weird position, And then this puzzle here, guys, you have to move both of these levers to make both of these rotating plates move at the same time on the same axis so that you can get them to all link up for this puzzle. And it involves twisting them both a few times. I trimmed it out because it's one of those puzzles where you're not going to get stuck on this one, and it just gives me the opportunity to make the video a little bit shorter and a little bit more streamlined. Because this one's about 3 hours and 23 minutes, which is one of the longer projects I've done. But the game itself, when you're playing it and you're not skimming all the things away and you're keeping in the fails and things, I think you can play this game for about a good 5 to 7 hours maybe. Depending on how good you are at Prince of Persia or how naturally it all comes to you. Because if it doesn't come natural to you, you might be falling off a lot and resetting a lot, but it's still a ton of fun. Now we have the warrior, which means it's time to bait him towards here, parry, go through his legs, and then knock him off. Which sometimes you can bait him closer than I did just then. My warrior fights between these ones and the final ones are going to be night and day, because the final one has a really, really bad checkpoint, and I had to do it about 4 or 5 times, because I couldn't figure out what to do at the end. So at the end, as soon as the game gave me control, he whacked me, and I thought it was mandatory damage, so I was super pissed off that this run was cancelled. And then I tried it again, and I was mashing buttons to get away from him, and as the camera was panning, I got away from him, and then I was running away from him, but the arena never ended, and I was running away from him for ages, and then he hit me. And here we have one of the worst segments in the game, which is using the Kruger slide to go down. And this right here, ladies and gentlemen, doesn't look like much, but it is one of the areas of the game that does not work as well as the other areas of the game. And it can be very awkward to get what you want here, and it can feel very slow and very frustrating, and when you want him to drop or mantle, he'll mantle instead of dropping, and he'll drop when you want to mantle. And this is the area where your inexperience with the controls and the way that Prince of Persia did its platforming might start to rear its head. And if you fall here, the checkpoint is all the way at the start of it again. And I fell twice and got really pissed off. I also messed this jump up because I jumped too soon, and it tells you it's an Elika jump, and if you do the Elika jump too high, you'll jump across this and fall to your death. And then you go all the way back up to the top and get frustrated by the Kruger slide because it's incredibly slow. But even that, like, look at that. Doesn't look so bad, does it? Still looks pretty fun, probably, to you. And it is, but to me, this is the one area of the parkour that's aged the worst. Anything that involves going down does not feel as fun or as fluid as going up. And that's the type of thing that if they made this game now, like, look how fucking slow this is, dude. I can literally check my Twitter while this is happening. Irritating. Anyhow, on to finishing off the warrior. This is the final warrior fight before we go and cleanse him. And as I was saying, before I got reminded of that wonderful sequence, I failed this fight a few times. At first, he hit me during the cutscene. After that, I didn't know if you could parry him, so I tried to block to try and stay safe, and he hit me through my block. So then I thought he was completely unable to be parried and blocked, so I avoided him, and then I ended up getting hit. And then afterwards, I tried to parry him, and it was just, you parry him. It's mad easy. And I was like, oh my god, I really did all this again to have this embarrass me? And the problem with it is not the fact you have to do 2 warrior fights in a row, and the last one he's on fire and it's kind of different. It's the fact that you have to do this sequence of plates before it that's really slow and really boring and really repetitive. So I did that sequence of plates a bunch of times and it was really irritating. If it wasn't for that, if the checkpoint was at the fight, I would have had no problems. But this is the one area where the save point is really shit. And even then it's not too bad. But if you were wondering, watching this, which was the one that gave you the most trouble, it was the coming fight against the warrior. I think it's the cleansing one. And it's not a difficult fight, fundamentally. I just kept getting hit. And it just seemed really awkward at first, but then I realised what I was doing wrong, and it went down really quickly. And it was the final part of recording the main areas, the main fertile grounds, and then you just have to go inside the temple in the tree and take on Ahriman. And then you've got the end of the game. Which is one of my favourite endings as well. Because there are a few games that let you do what you do at the end of this game, and it's one of the things that Prince of Persia is known for too. The endings in Prince of Persia are not always what they appear. And I've always appreciated that about the games. And admittedly, a lot of them are sequel baits, so they'll do something to cliffhanger the shit out of you and go, there's gonna be more, what's gonna happen? But it's still pretty cool. And speaking of pretty cool, I really like the area here where there's just that sea of corruption with these magma flows that are just randomly spaced in them. Here is the Concubines insect that's still chasing us, a little swarm of locusts that hasn't realised her master is dead. You'd think the familiars would leave once the master decays, but apparently not. But what do you think they would have done for a sequel? If you heard a crack just then, that was my wrist. I apologise. I've been talking for nearly 3 hours, guys, and as much as I'd like to stop it, go back and re-record that segment just then, I think you can survive a few cracks, right? You've probably heard me spluttering and breathing and all the other great things, picking my face and everything. And here we have another environmental hazard, the Cthulhu Tickles. The tickle spot of the Eldritch Abomination. The old gods coming back to give us a bit of the old salad fingers. So this sequence is a lot more intimidating than it actually is. And as I mentioned earlier, guys, a lot of these work on a rotation. Each of these will scale on a rotation of their animations. So if you start and the first part is safe, usually every jump after that is secured because you're on the cadence that's going to be safe. And it looks way closer than it is. This whole sequence here is one of those programmed moments to make it seem like you're about to die when you're really safe. And Prince of Persia's always done this. It's one of the things that Uncharted went on to do as well, where you're running and you're jumping and everything around you is collapsing, but you have just enough time to grab everything perfectly, swing around like a lunatic, and then at the end of it be perfectly fine. But at the time, it feels like you're this close to dying because all of this has been meticulously planned to give it the illusion of a last-minute escape. But I've done this segment 4 times because this is where the shitty checkpoint is, and I can confirm, as long as you run when that first one disappears, you will never ever die here. I've never died here, even though it looks like I'm about to get absolutely destroyed by gods that we cannot see, but will always feel them, and their unholy presence. And then here we go, time to take on everybody's favourite dude. So, this fight is conceptually the same, the only difference now is you have to trap him in a cage. And if you roll over here, because this is kind of like the fastest way to be mobile, if you bait him all the way towards this wall, you can affect his AI like this when he starts to try and bloody flank you. He decides to do a random rester and it doesn't work out so well. But when he realises the errors of his mistakes when I roll out, he starts coming forward again. And now he's coming for me, I can back up here, and if I parry him, slide under him with A, I can then use the Elika combo and it usually triggers enough push for him to go near the cage. But that time it didn't do it, so wait for him to move, and then do a string, and then boom, you trigger the cutscene. And as long as Elika's with you, you can finish him off. But there's probably a sequence of moves you can do there that has better knockback, that will put him into position so that you can finish him off. And I just didn't discover it in my time with the game. I recorded this game over 3 evenings, if you're wondering, guys. They were about 3-hour sessions each, along those lines. And then I did have to do some re-recording because I didn't do the start of the game. Because at first I didn't know if I was going to be able to even capture it, because I didn't know if the game was going to be even worth playing. You know, I knew the game was good, and I knew I liked the game, and I was having a lot of fun playing it, but I didn't know if it was going to be something that I could make for YouTube. And then I had a look on YouTube to see what people were doing with the game, and it was a lot of long plays, a lot of let's plays, a lot of people, you know, doing the PC version, a lot of people back in the day covering it, finding all the seeds and what have you. 2009 was a different time on YouTube. It was a more innocent time. It was a better time, because the people doing it were doing it for better reasons. It wasn't just let's all follow the same annoying trends and turn everything into this homogeneous, amoebus, vapid, soulless, heartless example of what video content can be. But here we go. This is the cleansing of the warrior. And we're greeted by plates. And this is when the game gets a little frustrating, when there's a lot of plates like this, because they're so bloody slow. And here's the thing, guys, right? If somebody in the comments goes, Chris, you can press a button to speed these up, I don't know why you weren't doing it, I don't know how you didn't figure it out, I don't know why the game didn't tell you, or something like that, I will go, oh my god, you're a genius, I feel like a clown, thank you for telling me, right? But as it stands, I tried pressing the button on this plate at a certain time to do like a just input, a perfect input, and nothing seemed to make a difference. And I don't know if this is just the way the game is meant to be, which I believe it is, but it's one of those things where any sequence where you have to do this for a lot, if you fail these sections, and I failed the section coming up because this was a tricky one, you have to do this again. And it's really not cool the second time. You know how Sonic is really fun that first time because you're flying around at light speed and it's so intense and adrenaline fueled, and then the second time a bit of that magic is gone because you can tell that all you're doing is holding forward and the game's pinging you off like a pinball and you're just hitting buzzers everywhere and you're not doing anything. Well, that's the problem, isn't it? It's like a magic trick. The more you see a magic trick, the more you start to see the seams, the more you start to see the lack of magic and the greater sense of manipulation. And nobody wants to feel like they got cheated with a magic trick. They want to think it's fucking magic. That's why we invented magic. Because it's to give you that sense of awe, that awestruck sense and fascination that you had as a child. But this is the fight that took me a bunch of times, guys, because you have to do 2 warrior fights in a row. And the second one is after a bunch of platforming, and the checkpoint is before you've even got here. You have to do all those plates again. So you have to do all those plates, fight this one, then do the sliding segment, and then fight the guy again, and then there's your checkpoint. So this is easily the most intensive part of the no damage run. But it's not difficult, it's just I was doing it wrong, you know? But this guy falls into the darkness, and then the tower starts to have trouble, so we're going to transition to the sliding segment. And then after this, I'm going to jump, use Elika to get distance. I don't know if it matters, I don't know if it's dynamic. And then as soon as the cutscene starts playing, you can't skip it, which is really frustrating, I'm going to spam dodge backwards. That noise just then was me saving manually on the encounter to see whether or not you can checkpoint here, but I can confirm you don't. There's no checkpoint here. And all you need to do is kind of avoid him and parry him. I didn't try attacking him. I tried attacking him then with Elika and he just throws her away. And you notice that pretty much if you wait, he gradually decays and the environment gradually breaks down as well. So the whole point of this is this war of attrition where you have to be defensive. And there might be some sexy strategy here, but I was getting really annoyed with this segment because of the shitty checkpoint and I had no interest in finding it. And that's my biggest concern when it comes to any kind of project, is when I come across a bad checkpoint and it ruins my fun of what I'm doing, it can be such a huge demotivator. And it's a shame too, because even this game, you know, what I'm doing is only frustrating because I'm doing a very specific type of run in a very odd game. And the only reason that this game was even remotely frustrating was because of the port. Like, the checkpoints in this game are not bad. This is the only truly bad one. Some of them are kind of inconvenient, but they're not truly bad checkpoints. They're not the kind of thing that you can get in some games. In games far more demanding and far more difficult than this. But it was the Alt F4ing the game and then bringing it back up to try and get back to where I was, because you can't die, because you can't reset, because you can't retry. Like, the game has completely got rid of the ability to clean the palette, completely clean the plate and start again. And the only way to do that is to close the application. And then when you launch the application, the game doesn't load. And the sheer irony of it is, when you fast travel, the game loads. It's the same loading screen, it's the same circular icon, but it doesn't freeze. It's only the initial game load. That first game load, for some reason, is absolutely busted. Every fast travel while you're playing is perfect and how the game should load. It takes 2 seconds, you're in the next zone. It's wonderful. But that starting one when you boot the game, it's just a bitch. And I've never recorded a guide like this. I've never recorded a project like this because I've never had to fight the port like that. I've had recording errors. I've had problems with the recording. You know, look at Rage 2. Rage 2 is such a fascinating one because not only was Vulkan cooking my recording so I couldn't do game capture, I had to do display capture. So every so often I'd be clicking on my taskbar and opening Photoshop and the fucking clock and everything, which was a nightmare. But the difficulty glitched as well. There was a glitch on the difficulty on that game where the hardest difficulty defaulted to the easiest difficulty and gave you credit for it being Nightmare when it wasn't. So I played that game on Nightmare, but everybody died really quickly and I thought the game was amazingly balanced and really fun, and it turns out I was living a fucking lie. And it just goes to show, doesn't it, when you record, strange things happen. But this place, guys, when you come back to this place looks amazing. When you're running this game on a higher frame rate and you've got the higher resolutions kicking in, you've got your graphics card bumping all those visual effects, it's an absolute splendor of just wonderful timeless design. There's so much great craftsmanship here as we enter the temple in the tree. And this is kind of funny because you come into this and it's locked behind all these abilities. And I think on the narrative here, this is the idea that the only people who can get into the temple at this point are the people that have proven themselves worthy of collecting all the seeds and have proven themselves worthy of having all the plate abilities. And it's kind of a cool idea, isn't it? It's assembling the Triforce, it's getting the Lord's Vessel, it's all the great moments in video games that opened up the doorways to the next sequence. But the problem is, the plates in this game are so brain dead and uninteresting and slow and not very fun that these segments are quite boring. Because you're just kind of like, I hope this ends soon because I'm not doing much. And for a game that's so accessible, never punishes failure, and is built around this feedback loop of classic Prince of Persia platforming, these parts here are a super miss. And do you notice? All the other plates are fine, and then the moment I do this one with all these post-processing effects, OBS is like, hang on a second, this doesn't look so good, what the fuck's going on? And gladly, you know, Magic Carpet Ride, very tedious, not difficult. The only reason you'll die is when you hold left and the camera doesn't let you go left and you hit a wall. But these segments don't have checkpoints either. So if you fuck these up, you have to do them all again. And it's the most banal thing. And I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, if we could get that pro mode, which made all of this faster, which made all of it more precise, more specific, more taxing on the player, it would just be so much more interesting. If you could attack during this, if you actually had to dodge in an interesting way, but it's just, it's all so half-baked, isn't it? It's half-baked, it's accessible, it's baby's first Sonic Adventure plates, isn't it? And I do apologise about the capture, guys. I don't know if this is OBS having problems. I don't know if it's my playback preview screen having all these problems, but if that's in the final video, it's could just come back just there. So thank God for that. And what it is, guys, is I record my videos on quite a high setting because I want the best quality I can get before YouTube compresses the shit out of it and makes it look ugly. And my PC is more than capable of doing it. It's just the software that I use, no matter what settings I use, you get encoding overload errors. And it doesn't matter how much you turn it down. And I don't want to compromise quality of the footage by turning down the bitrate when I still get those encoding errors on low bit rates. You know, and I've tried all the different settings that everybody recommends that you change to have, you know, between OpenGL and Vulkan and what have you. And of all my experience in recording, this is the best one for the least amount of problems. I don't get any audio or visual desync anymore when I capture, but every so often the picture freezes or stutters a little bit on some intensive moments when it's encoding error overload. And there are times when I do full guides where it barely happens. And then there are other times when it happens a lot. It's kind of odd. And when I look at my taskbar, my CPU's not spiking, my PC's not having problems. It's just something in OBS is potentially not where it needs to be to do the highest level of fidelity, or I'm messing something up. And I'm probably messing something up, and when I fix that, it will be wonderful. But every single fix I've tried and I've used, all the tutorials, all the forum posts, nothing's made a difference. And for me, guys, when you have something that works with technology, when you do this, you should stay with it as long as you can until you find something that works better, or someone you trust who knows what they're talking about has a solution. It's the best thing you can do, guys, because what works for you doesn't work for everybody. Just look at fucking Windows 10. For all we know, this is Windows 10. Windows 10's doing some bullshit in the background, it's pulling resources, and OBS is having problems because of it. It wouldn't surprise me one bit if that was the reason. But I've just been completely talking through this fight against Elika's dad, who's transformed into this crazy-looking nightmare guy. And the irony is, he's the exact same fight, he just looks a bit cooler. He attacks always the moment he moves when you get close enough, so there's no surprises, there's no ambiguity, there's no guessing, there's no 50-50s, there's just every single time you go near him, he'll do the same swing. The moment he moves, block him, and then beat him up. And it's super disappointing because he looks cool, and I love the idea of the combat in this game, but every attack being the same at the start of every attack is not conducive to a very interesting fight, unless you do fancy combos, and that's kind of what I've tried to do. And then here we go, guys, final boss time. So this is Ahriman, the dragon, or the darkness, or the giant demon, or whoever this dude is, the dark god. And this is a very Bowser-esque encounter. So you're in his POV right now, which always reminds me of Turtles in Time when Shredder's in the machine trying to grab you on that awesome boss fight. And he's going to attack you. The screen is all saturated in black and white, but you'll notice your colour is still on your characters to show that you're the goodness and you're the hero in this endeavour, as everything around you is losing its lustre. And all you do is you platform onto these safe havens. The darkness swells up in this huge river of blackness, and then you get to a platform that lets you cleanse the altar, and you do this 3 times, and Ahriman dies, or gets sealed away, or goes home, or whatever it is that happens. And you get a checkpoint on each of these. And if you didn't get a checkpoint, you can manually save, because you can bet your ass I manually saved, because I don't actually like this sequence. As far as final bosses go, you should always fight your final boss. It should not be planned platforming, planned driving sequence. Like, I don't mind if you have a little bit of that. There's a, you know, like an hors d'oeuvre in between. But fundamentally, a final boss is kind of in the name, isn't it? It should be the quintessential culmination of everything you have learned, everything you have done, and all of your skills in the game coming together to overcome an incredibly skilled opponent. And this is not that. This is a cinematic boss. This is what DSP would call a puzzle boss. And I don't even know if DSP played this. I hope he didn't play this. Some things are sacred, right? But here's the second one. Something to note too. The darkness that surrounds you is quite generous in where it splashes, you know? It doesn't clean up after itself, it mucks about, it attracts sharks. But if you notice, if you stand on that platform, that glowing symbol, that haven, even if the darkness washes onto you, and even if you touch it when you're on that symbol, you're absolutely fine. Because the visual effects here are way more dramatic than where they've put the scripted kill boxes and what have you. So the triggers to steal you here and put you into the darkness are very binary. As long as you're on that hexagon, you're absolutely fine. And here comes the second one. I do like the lighting here though. You know his hands? How his hands have got the white threads all over them. It's almost like cross-hatching, and it's really stark and bleaked out with this blown out white balancing here on the contrast. And you can see all the patterns on him, the art style of the Corrupted. It's a really nice touch. It's really nice graphically too. And here comes the final rotation. The music in this game is super too. It's just got that super fun Prince of Persia feeling. I don't think there's any part of this game that I don't like, you know, just from a very entry level. The presentation is great, the controls are great, the graphics are great, the story's great, you know, the voice work is sublime, the audio's great. It's just got such a great sense of feedback and sense of design. It's just a really well-made game. And it didn't fare so well. I don't think the critics were too harsh to it. I don't think it hit the kind of numbers that the original trilogy did. But I don't think anybody just came out and just absolutely shit on it. Except for maybe Jim Sterling, but then again, go read his Vanquish review and tell me afterwards if you're ever going to trust a single word that man is saying. Because I don't know about you guys, but I don't go to Yahtzee to see what he thinks is a good game. I go to Yahtzee to see him shout at things that he had problems with in a game and make up really, really funny things that make me laugh. I don't go to him for a good voice and a good vision on what makes a good game mechanically and what separates it from the rest of other games. You know, those people are essentially comedians, the characters, the caricatures, and Jim Sterling to me is no different. I've always thought of him as a character, that when I read that Vanquish review, if he was being serious in that review as trying to be a proper serious reviewer, he might be one of the worst reviewers I have ever read. Because to miss the point so spectacularly, it was unbelievable. Unbelievable, the myopia in that review. But there is the final spot, guys. Now we've opened up and got rid of the darkness, we can hit the plate, we can go on a magic carpet ride directly into his face, and then we can hit him with the old Kratos, you can't eat me, bitch, I'm the god of war. And this is an interesting moment, this, when you're doing it, because it slows down dramatically, but I have no idea why, because the visuals here aren't that cool. Like, did this look different on console? Like, look how cool this looks with the boss, as opposed to how empty and uninteresting that previous frame was. And then you mash Y as fast as you can, and then you end the dragon. And now is the ending. Which, spoiler alert, ladies and gentlemen, you might not have seen coming. Look how cool his coat looks. Do you know what I find really interesting about his coat, too? His coat has a dragon on it. And I think that that's kind of telling as well. That's a little bit of interesting imagery that might be a bit of the foreshadowing of what happens in this ending. I also love his sword and his holster, his scabbard, or his sheath. One thing you'll notice, though, and I noticed this when I was editing, when I was trimming out certain parts, at the start of a battle, when he draws the sword, he doesn't draw the sword. Because the sword's comedically long, you couldn't draw that sword in a conventional manner. He pulls it out, holding it in like a reverse grip, and it just comes through the sheath, because it's so ludicrously long, and then he does a fancy kind of twirl with it. And if you watch it frame by frame, you can see him doing it, and the animation's really cool, but the sword just completely phases through the container there. It phases through his protective cover. I love this as well. I love the fact that you can do something during the credits. This is a bit of a somber moment, and a bit of a reflective moment, and the credit crawl here is such a good touch as you walk over here, and you know what's about to happen, guys. Because there's a wonderful sense of, in Prince of Persia, that the more you change, the more damage you do. And it was one of the things that inspired a book that I wrote, this idea of the knock-on effect of actions that are meant to help, but can sometimes end up hurting. And I love that idea. It's such a cool idea. And this is a wonderful example of what people do when they're at their darkest. And it's another reason that I love this game, because it gives you this opportunity. It doesn't show you, it doesn't parade it in front of you, it doesn't take it away from you, it lets you play it. And games nowadays could really do with learning from this. Cough cough, Last of Us 2 is a huge pile of shit. Because look at this. These are the fertile ground altars that are all showing now that we've saved the world, brought it back to its previous health. And each one of these is a symbol of our hard work and a nail in Ahriman's coffin. And what are we going to do? We're going to break these seals. Because in this game, ladies and gentlemen, you do not play the hero. No, you were the hero, but right now, the hero is going to become the villain. The hero is going to be no different than Elika's father. You are willing to sacrifice everything you just put right to bring back somebody you care about, which makes you no different than the person you've been fighting the whole game. And it's the wonderful cyclical nature of Prince of Persia. And the music here is so great too, because you can hear it. It's the kind of music that puts you on edge because something's not right. And you can hear Ahriman whispering, seducing you, lulling you like the siren in your ear. But the irony there is, he doesn't need to, because the prince doesn't care. He's too far gone now. He wants Elika back, and he doesn't care what the cost is. And that's what makes it all the more powerful. And we get to do this, which I love, because you've just spent all the game sealing away the darkness, and now you are the darkness. It's a beautiful touch. And it's a slow moment. There's no combat here, guys. There's nothing new here. There's no conventional design here. But what there is a really, really cool narrative beat. A rather dark narrative beat, too. And I loved it. I loved it when I did it, and I loved it when I did it again. And I'd forgotten about this sequence, too, when I came back to the game. And I don't actually know if there's a different ending you can choose here. Can you, like, leave the forbidden area and just let it be? I hope you can't, because I feel like that this was the best way to end it. This is me fighting with a piece of wood. Always good at the end of a game. It's interesting though, isn't it? This area looks so beautiful as well, but I prefer it when it's covered in darkness. When it's covered in darkness and the sky's so dramatic, it just looks wonderful. But it's interesting, Ahriman, isn't it? Because I wonder what he's going to do. I wonder, because they say stuff like he's the thing that scares children and he eats babies in the night and stuff. He's got all kinds of these horrible stories told about him. Like, what would an eternity of darkness really look like? And I think the perspective that I look at this from, with the prince, which I call him the prince because I don't know his name, even though technically I think in this game you do play like a thief. He's a pauper, isn't he? Or maybe he's just a prince and he's off on his adventures and we'll never find out because they never continued the story. But when you break those altars, it breaks the seal that's holding the temple closed. This is so that the darkness cannot spread again. This is so that it has to be the force of a human hand or agency of man to bring this shadow back into the world. It doesn't happen by accident, you know. And this is the reason why this is so powerful as well. As we are the prime mover in ending the world right now. But I look at it like this. As much as this is a selfish deed, as much as this is a bad take and a bad idea, what are you doing, Prince? I think this comes from the perspective of the arrogance of this character. I think he knows if he can beat this guy once, he can find a way to beat him again, but instead of losing Elika, he can save her. And I do think that this is that ultimate act of love. It's the ultimate act of, this time we'll do it, but this time it'll be different. And that's kind of quintessential Prince of Persia and what makes the stories in these games so interesting. And I agree, man. He was a pussy, dude. I did that guy in like one attempt. I just cleansed 3 platforms, effortless. What is he really going to do as a huge sky-devouring black dragon thing? He's not going to do too much. I think we can take him. It's like DSP, dude. He can take Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson's old now and he'll just kick his legs. Easy fight. But here's where it all started. Remember the flashbacks? The severing of the tree, the releasing of the seal on Ahriman, the corrupted, all of it. And there are the seeds that put the world back in order and brought bright light back to the land. And of course we're going to nick it now. We're going to be the light thief. This is some bullshit Destiny 2 DLC right now. And then the music changes as well into this wonderful... It's that key, isn't it? That kind of, you don't quite know where this is going. Is this good? Is this bad? It's mysterious. It's eerie. I like the sound effects here as well. The atmospherics. The door opening for you. The beautiful sense of scale and grandeur. And then the closing moments of the game. There's an interesting silence here as well, which you probably wish I would have held for the majority of this video, if you're not a fan of my commentary. But I love the fact that she's so saddened by it. And I love the fact he doesn't say anything. Because she knows why. She knows why, but he's just fucking doomed us all. And they never made a sequel to see where that was going to go. Anyhow, ladies and gentlemen, that was Prince of Persia. That was my run of it. You could use it as a walkthrough if you want to, but it's meant to just be a no-damage project. That is the first project of 2021, my 10th year on YouTube. Thank you so much for making it this far if you did. I hope it helped, or you at least enjoyed the discussion. And most importantly, you take care now.